What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to episode 270 of the Massive Breakdown Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Mercules. Wait a minute. No, that's not right. That's not how it's been for a little bit, is it?
Did you do the intro without me? What?
I did do the intro without you. I feel bad about it now. Let me hand it back over to you, Kutch. Do it the right way.
I can't. No, you've already done it. It's ruined. It's ruined. Well, this is going to be a terrible episode now. It's cursed. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very excited to bring this episode to you. As always, I am your host, Kid Kutcha, and I am joined today by a very special guest, associate weapons designer from Bungie, and my longtime friend, Mercules. Mercules, welcome back to Destiny Massive Breakdowns. It has been too long.
It has been too long, and even though we do the Star Wars podcast every week, it feels really, really good to be back on what started it all on Massive Breakdowns. So I'm super stoked to be here. I'm really excited that I got to write my first weapon segment of a TWAB today.
Yeah.
And
congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was actually a pretty big deal. I was like, my heart was fluttering before the TWAB actually released. I wrapped myself up in a playtest, so I didn't even know when it went live until my phone started blowing up.
Very nice. Yeah. No, I'll try not to give you a hard time about, typos and grammar and things, but, pretty good. Pretty good job for the first try. It wasn't bad.
Not bad for a first attempt. That's how I feel about it too. And I'm super excited to talk Destiny and numbers and perks and weapons and balance and all the things we talked about on the show back when I was a host. But now I actually have some expertise on it. I'm not just some guy in the community.
Yeah, it's going to be nice for once to have somebody who knows something on this show, because that is always the struggle every single week, is just trying to find anyone who knows anything, for sure. And now we've got you back, and this time you actually do have some concrete, in stone info for us. Before we get into all of that, I'm going to just take a brief note. I want to say thank you to all of our patrons, all of our reviewers. I'm not going to sit and do the housekeeping at the beginning of this episode, as is tradition, out of courtesy to a guest who is spending long hours working on Destiny. I'm going to go ahead and delay and do some thank yous for patrons at the end. And we actually got a ton of great reviews this week. But I'm going to delay those, and we're just going to do like a massive thank you section in the next episode for all of our reviewers. So thank you so much to everyone. I'm not forgetting or ignoring you, but I think everyone is just as excited as I am to dive right into this one. So for those who usually skip 10 minutes into the episode, gotcha.
Not today.
Yeah. So this was without any further joking about it, a really, really exciting TWAB. I'm very happy to see that Fallout will be doing an extremely long Gambit stream. I think we're all excited for that. I'm very happy to see that Ill Physics finally got his Dire Promise fix that he's been seeking for a long time. I think a lot of people. What I'm trying to say is a lot of people were made very happy. So kudos to you for being able to pick a TWAB where you had like just tons of good news to deliver.
Yeah, I think that's the only reason I was able to put my name on this one, is because we were like going on the list of all the changes, and we were like, man, if there's ever been a TWAB that is just like solid gravy, it's this one right here. It's not all perfect. Anytime you make a balance change to a weapon that people enjoy, there's going to be some people who don't like it. But, as far as things that we've wanted to do for a while, that the community has wanted us to do for a while, some really obvious outliers that existed, like we tried to hit as many of them as we could. And one thing that was really, really important to me is that we get the stuff to look forward to in the future section down there at the bottom. Because like we are working on a bunch of stuff, and like we know we'll be making changes. We might not necessarily know the changes exactly that we're making, but like we're actively iterating on stuff. And it was really important that we get that out there so people could see like, hey, we hear this stuff, we experience it too. Like we're going to be looking at this in the near future.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited to I know you probably don't have a ton of details that you can give me about future-looking stuff. That's always a sketchy area to make calls on. But I am excited to just briefly touch on that stuff at the end, because there's a lot in that section that I think people are pretty hyped about. I'm pretty hyped about a bunch of it. But let's start at the top, because we've got a lot of gravy, as you said, to get through. And so I don't want to skip any of it. So we've got the TLDR here, just kind of, and this is all the stuff we're going to be talking about today, followed up with a bunch of questions sourced from community members about various weapon balancing things. We've got PvE buffs, we've got high impact auto rifles, lightweight bows, a whole bunch of perk changes, exotic weapon buffs, including a bunch of anti-champion functionality that I'm very excited for. I know a lot of other folks are also very excited to have those options in the toolkit. Some additional exotic changes for weapons, for armor, and some perk pool updates. Again, more perk stuff. Also, very exciting weapon stats becoming unhidden: airborne effectiveness, recoil, zoom, aim assist. How much work was that to make happen?
That was so much work that was started well before I got to Bungie. And is just now being released in season 18. And that's not because like we just held it back and like didn't want to put it in the game. It's because it legitimately was an absurd amount of work. There's a lot of different teams that have to touch something when we make a change like that. And it was no small feat to get that stuff in the game, but we knew, and we said in the TWAB, like it made build crafting hard. It made comparing weapons difficult when there were hidden stats that were invisible that affected the feel of a gun. It was not a good experience. So it was really, really important to get that stuff in there. And a lot of people at Bungie did a lot of really great work to make that happen. And I can tell you from the playtest experience that we have, it makes a huge difference. It is a really, really big quality life change.
Yeah, I'm very, very pleased. I mean, I love our third party tools we have, in the community. There's a lot of really great tools that have been surfacing this information for a while for us, but to be able to see it in game while I'm playing without having to interrupt the experience, that's huge. That by itself is like a TWAB that I'm just happy. If that's the only change, I'm pretty happy. So this TWAB starts off right. So we've got some stuff here to actually dive into, some questions about some of this stuff in the TWAB. Let's jump right into these weapon archetype changes. The scout rifle buff in PvE, I think universally is just going to make people happy. I don't really have any questions about that. I just want to say thanks to you and the whole team, because scouts are going to feel better.
Yeah. Well, we gave him a little buff last time, but like they're still just not really super popular. And dregs thankfully never complain about getting one tap in the head by a primary. So we felt like, what the heck? Scouts could use a little bit more love. So here it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did want to ask about the high impact auto rifles, because they have always felt like they were just on the cusp of being playable in the Crucible specifically. And aside from a few outliers, which again were still like just barely playable, but not really good, most of them have been in that on the cusp where it's like, I feel like this could be good, but it's not. So I'm curious, making this change, what's the thinking in terms of raising the stability? Was there a floor stability level that was targeted to make all of the non-sunset ones feel good, or was there preference given to some specific high impacts? And can you give us specific numbers?
Yeah, for sure. I absolutely can. So the previous range for high impacts, and these are the adjusted stats that exist in game currently, right? Not the ones that previously were shown for years and years. It was about 15 to 25. And a lot of those were actually like gathered towards the lower end, especially of the non-sunset ones. And it just made them feel super unwieldy. So what we did is we actually moved the new range up, is now 25 to 35. we still wanted to keep the stability lower than other auto rifle subfamilies. But we did want them to feel a little bit better. And actually, a lot of the differences here are very noticeable when you use them. I don't know that it's going to make them meta breakers or like world beaters or anything, but it makes the guns feel a lot better to use. So the Herod C was already super high. It was already at 27. So that one gets...
that's one of the better ones.
Yeah, that one gets the smallest buff. So that's going up by 6 to 33. The False Promises is going up from 17 to 29. The Age-Old Bond is going up from 18 to 30. The Cryshura Mellow is going up from 13 to 25. And the Come to Pass is going up from 14 to 26.
Very nice. Well, I am excited to take some of those out and see how they feel now. Again, it's kind of one of those odd weapon archetypes that you just don't see very often in PvP or in PvE for that matter. So I'm curious to see what this does for us. Speaking of weapon types that you don't see very often in the Crucible, lightweight bows. Lightweight bows, man. So this is one that we actually had people specifically asking about. And I forget now who it was that was asking, because I just deleted their question because I was like, oh, this is answered in the TWAB, so we don't need to ask it. But I've always felt like it's the poor accuracy that makes me unwilling to play the lightweights. I mean, the damage certainly also is obviously a difference maker, but the accuracy has been a pain. But we're looking at draw speed and perfect draw changes here. So I'm curious, what does the team see the role of these weapons as in the Crucible, and how did you kind of arrive at these specific changes? So what we wanted to do with this is, like, we wanted, instead of pushing them closer to the precision subfamily of bows, right, which are already pretty strong enough on their own. What the precisions have going for them is higher damage, higher accuracy at range, right? If we had pushed the lightweights any more in that direction, like, I feel like it would have started to blend those two subfamilies together, and they would have lost some of the differentiation. And so instead, we tried to look at, like, what do the lightweights do that's unique? Why is it that they don't feel super good to play with right now? And can we make them better in this role that we envision them for, which is like a much more up close, like rapidly firing 2 arrows and actually using the bow to finish off targets as opposed to blinting or cleaning up targets, right? So there's only so many stats on a bow that you can really change, right? If you increase the damage, you got to increase the draw time. If you increase the accuracy, you probably have to increase the draw time as well. Those things just push it closer to precision. So that's something we wanted to do. So we spent a bunch of time playing with lightweight bows, and we kind of came to the conclusion that they weren't super good because it was so unforgiving of the perfect draw that you were losing damage, you were losing accuracy. It just didn't feel great. And also that the draw speed was just a little bit on the slower side for what you were trying to do, which is fire 2 arrows quickly. So now we've made it more forgiving really on that first arrow. So you can draw that arrow and hold it just a little bit longer to make your first shot a little bit easier. And then when they increase the draw speed, you can get that second shot off faster. And we hope that it will push them in a direction where people are more willing to actually, like, use them as a primary and less of an assist tool or less of like a cleanup tool. I personally think they feel pretty good with this change, but they definitely are more of a close range weapon than the precision bows are. So, okay, yeah. So we're looking at this. This is an aggressive precision primary tool, something you're using for peak shooting more rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I have to say I've always hung on to the Vow because it's the only lightweight that ever really felt good to me. So maybe I'll take it out after this and see how it feels. All right, so lightweights, and just for everyone, in case you don't have the TWAB in front of you, the base draw time is reduced by 5% from 612 milliseconds to 580, and the perfect draw window actually gets a significant buff in its range. So the current range for perfect draw is 0.3 to 0.5 seconds, depending on the stability. And that is, the floor is moving up to 0.55 seconds. So you can hold the perfect draw for longer now with minimum stability than you could before with maximum. So that's actually a pretty significant buff, especially for people who don't crutch on Oathkeepers when they're running bows. And then 0.8 seconds at the high end. I mean, that's a long time to hold a perfect draw. That's a very long time.
Yeah, that's longer than the optimal time to kill for a lot of primary weapons. So
yeah, definitely gives them some room to work there. So moving on through the changes here, hand cannons, as mentioned before, Dire Promise's zoom stat is 14 again. Thank goodness. So Dire Promise is once again able to be playable, even though it is still overshadowed stat-wise by many of the newer in-game hand cannons. And let's see, glaives. So glaives I know is a tough one because you don't personally work on glaives, if I'm not mistaken.
No, we pretty much have one designer who works very intensely on glaives, and he does a fantastic job on them. They are like his baby, and he's done really great work. But a lot of the glaive changes go through him, and I'll be honest, they're totally a black box to me. Like I look at it and I'm like, oh, I understand none of this. And so I have to kind of refer to him anytime anything glaive related comes up. So unfortunately, not a huge help on the glaive changes in this one. But yeah, we knew that there's been a lot of consternation and confusion going on for a long time about how they interact with various different melee perks. And we mentioned a few TWABs or a few sandbox TWABs back that like we were trying to clear that up. We were trying to streamline it. And this is, like kind of step one of, okay, there are exotic armor pieces that activate on melees. Which one of those can we make work with the glaive without absolutely just breaking something or destroying something or just causing all kinds of nonsense? So this was a pass. And I honestly think they're pretty popular exotic armor pieces. I think people are going to have a lot of fun comboing these things together.
No, I agree. I think that there is a lot of fun to be had with all three of those with glaives. Feedback fence is already a good time. And being able to pair it with a glaive, I think, is going to be fun. Karnstein's, you just made PvE on my Warlock so much more relaxing. I already prefer to just run, when I can do a Void Burn, I prefer to just run a glaive and just go to town with Echo of Legion, but now I can do it on all colors. Necrotic Grip, another fun one, spreading poison with glaives. So my question here, and I don't know if you can answer this, so just tell me you don't know, but are there other exotic armors that are being looked at to integrate with glaive melees that you can share? Like, are there things on the radar?
There are things on the radar.
Okay. Well, I'll try not to paint you into corner here and just list every exotic armor that could pair with them. But that's good enough. That's good enough. I really kind of want Kepri's Sting to work with a glaive. But anyways, breach grenade launchers, just wonderful quality of life. Concussion grenades can no longer roll because blinding grenades are better. So yeah, so I love to see that. Heavy grenade launchers. This was another one that we got some questions on because they have been feeling lackluster for a lot of folks in PvE for a very long time. And I think, seeing a nice 10% damage buff versus majors and above. Obviously not including Parasite as noted in the TWAB. And do you feel like this is going to give them some parity with some of the other options for DPS and ad clear? Yeah,
I absolutely do. I don't know that they're going to stack up at like the absolute highest level of like premium optimum DPS, but they are significantly more fun to use in everything up to that level of content. I will be honest, like we are a team. There's a lot of us on it. I'm not a heavily PvE focused sandbox designer. A lot of our other sandbox designers are heavily PvE focused. So we kind of all get together in a little, powwow and talk about all these changes. And I was a little hesitant, but what had happened is I'd found like I think it was a memory interdict maybe in live that had chain reaction, and I'd been using it a bunch, and it was good enough, right? But then in the playtest, I went and used it, and I was like, oh wow, all right. So I was really sold, really on board with this change. It makes them super, super fun to play with in PvE.
All right. Well, that's something to look forward to. I've always wanted to I've wanted grenade launchers to feel better because, they do give you that nice multiple ad clearing, a little more ammo than rockets. There's just a feel to lobbing a grenade and getting a nice explosion kill. It just feels good when it works. But when they don't do enough damage, it is frustrating.
They feel punchy is how they feel now. Yeah.
Punchy. I like it. All right. Well, so we've kind of covered a lot of the main weapon changes up there. Weapon pools are getting updated. The perk pool for Dares of Eternity weapons are being completely reworked, I gather, or just changed. And an origin trait is coming in, which I believe you can tell us nothing about.
Yeah, we had to leave some surprises for the actual release. But this actually kind of ties in. I think that there's a question that we have later about like how do we decide to rework perk pools. Yeah. So, we can go into more detail, but generally if there's like any really iconic combinations or perks, we keep those in it. And generally we'll drop the 3 or 4 worst perks out of each column and then add 3 or 4 like newer or more popular, more fun perks to it. So the reprises generally end up having, better perk pools than the originals did, or at least like they are filled with perks that might not have existed when the originals came out, right?
Yeah, I know there are a few weapons out there that were reprised that some people would argue came back with significantly worse perk pools.
Yeah, we try not to do that anymore. Just like straight up.
All right. Fair enough. I won't hold the past against you. I mean, I'm still sad about Blasphemer, but I'm trying not to be too bitter.
I've only been here since March, so
yeah, I can't blame you for anything.
I'm pretty sure you and I were complaining about some of those perk pools when we did the episode on it. So
it's good we've sent you off here to ensure that doesn't happen again, because I know that you're now in charge of everything, so we can blame you for anything that goes wrong.
I am an associate designer, so there are many rungs above me. And although I will say it feels pretty nice to have a bunch of people complimenting me on the weapons TWAB. But all I really did was just gather all that information up. I worked on a small part of it as part of a much larger team that made all of those changes happen. So it would be disingenuous of me to take credit for stuff that a bunch of other people worked very hard on and did a very good job on.
Yeah, well, I think that is always important to remind people that there are a lot of hands touching every single one of these changes. No change, or at least very few changes, would be a one-person job. Speaking of changes that would not in any way be a one-person job, let's roll on to the origin trait changes that we can talk about. Gambit and Iron Banner origin traits. They were, as you state, too specific to be generally useful. I would argue they were too specific to be useful in many cases. So they've been completely redesigned here. So the Invader Tracker now will be named Gun and Run, and the new functionality will give a sprint speed increase after a multi-kill, which I'm assuming will work similar to other multi-kill triggered effects like multi-kill clip, for example, or ambitious assassin. Would that be a pretty fair approximation?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the type of enemies that you kill and stuff like that. But it's, right. I mean, you're 100% correct that they were too specific. And basically, like the data that we looked at just showed that they hardly ever got picked if there was a choice. And that it was definitely not driving people to like want those weapons. And they didn't even, in general, we don't want a perk to only be useful in a specific mode, like one single mode, because that means that perk isn't appealing to people who maybe don't play that mode. Right. But in this case, they were kind of even unpopular, like even within that single mode. So both of them went through some pretty substantial reworks, and I think the new versions are much better and much more fun and much more competitive in their slots whenever there's another origin perk stacked up against them.
Yeah, well, they definitely sound more exciting. I do always love to be able to run faster, especially if I'm on a streak. So I'll admit this one, I don't know that it's my favorite origin perk, but I can definitely see a use case for it, and I'm going to be a lot more excited for it than I ever was for Invader Tracker. So the other one that's being changed is Skulking Wolf. And so this has been redesigned. It's retaining the same effect, but the trigger now is changing to activate at low health. So it'll work in all PvP modes, which I think is a stellar move here. In case you, our loyal listeners, are not remembering exactly what Skulking Wolf does, which I could hardly blame you for. Final blows grant enhanced radar and remove you from opposing radar. So that, I think, if you get a kill and you're at low health, that is an incredibly useful effect to have for literally anybody. And it's got a 10-second duration. And I'm assuming the duration wasn't touched in this iteration?
That was just the activator, to my knowledge. Now, it's super good perk now.
Yeah.
A lot of people use invis, not even it is difficult to see people who are invisible, but a lot of people use invis now, not even for the actual invisibility, but for the radar manipulation.
Yeah. And
this is a perk that allows you some semblance of that. Obviously on a less deterministic activator, but still it is a very, very good perk.
And low health, that's one of those Bungie terms that often suggests a specific threshold. Can you tell us specifically what it is? I didn't vet this question ahead of time.
I don't know. I'd have to look it up. I want to say that it's probably somewhere similar to what Pulse Monitor does or Eye of the Storm. It's probably somewhere in between those. Generally, if we have activators that are like the same activator across multiple perks, we try to line them up as close as we can. It's not always a guarantee, but usually we want the same activator to be at least similar enough to where you have a general idea of when it's going to proc.
Yeah. And so generally, what I would expect to see work here is it's probably going to be around 25%. I think that's ballpark where low health tends to be for perks. Okay. Well, fair enough. So yeah, so that I'm very excited about. It is incredibly common to end up at 25% health, and I have a lot of good Iron Banner weapon rolls that I think just got a lot better. So that's very exciting. Ambitious Assassin has fallen behind perks with similar functionality, such as Overflow. That's certainly fair to say. So it's getting a buff. The magazine overflow is going from 10 to 20% on primary weapons. Special and heavy staying at 10%, and the overflow cap is huge now. It used to be just an extra 50% would be capped at, but now it's 150%. So that is a lot for folks to who already liked Ambitious Assassin. Wellspring getting a buff, no longer has an internal cooldown. This does allow rockets and grenade launchers, you note, to return more ability energy when defeating groups with a single shot. So very excited for that. Wellspring just got super good. It was already a pretty useful perk.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I run Wellspring on my main Drang that I use in PvP. So
yeah, Wellspring Incandescent Drang is it's a beautiful thing. It's truly a beautiful thing. Okay, let's see here. When is the next question that I had that I wanted to ask you? So Lead from Gold wasn't respecting the functionality of splitting the special ammo picked up when two special weapons were equipped. So it's now correctly giving them each 50%. Is how I'm reading that change. Is that right?
Yeah. So
okay.
When you were picking up a special ammo brick, if you only had one special ammo weapon, all of the ammo was supposed to go to that weapon. If you had two, it was supposed to split between the two weapons, and Lead from Gold wasn't splitting it between the two weapons. So you're getting free special ammo in PvE, free special ammo anywhere Lead from Gold is active, but most of the time in PvE.
Yeah. Well, I guess that hurts the double special builds that were happening, but it's fair. It's fair. It was a glitch.
Yes. It was not intended.
Okay, so Zen Moment and Particle Repeater are both getting fixed. I want to skip to those. And by getting fixed, I mean their descriptions are getting fixed, because their descriptions have never actually spelled out what they've done, which has stimulated a lot of consternation and research and debate about exactly what they're doing. Are you able to right now just clarify that for us?
Yeah. So Zen Moment no longer says that it, increases stability, which is not what it does. What it does is it reduces the maximum recoil angle, and it now says that. And Particle Repeater now increases the stability stat. I don't know why previously it said like constrains recoil or something like that. That was like a one-off phrase that we used once, and then we like never used it again on any other perk. Like we try to keep our perk definitions constant the same way we try to keep our activators constant, right? So if we say greatly increases, that it means generally about this amount, right, or more. And we try to do that too with things that increase stability. But the problem is that we were saying that Zen Moment increased stability, and it really didn't. And then we were saying that Particle Repeater constrained recoil, and that's something we never use anywhere else. So it's like, yeah. So now it just they say exactly what it is that they do.
Okay, very nice. It's almost like they swapped descriptions here.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, Zen Moment was always constraining recoil, and Particle Repeater was always increasing stability. So I was surprised by Particle Repeater, I think because I never read the description, because when I selected it, it increased stability, and so I just didn't look at it.
Yeah. Well, we do have the ability to make certain perks that just directly influence a stat, like show up on the actual inspection screen. And so I think that it didn't confuse, most people who saw that, but there was some question of whether it did anything else or whether it changed anything else. And no, it didn't. It just increases the stability stats. So now at least that much is clear.
Yeah. Well, very good. Very good. Always nice to have one more item not to wonder about in Destiny. Another good change to note, Vice Stinger was intended to grant ammo on weapons that support it and charge and draw time on bows only. Linear fusions were getting the charge time bonus as well, which, yeah, that was pretty strong. So glad to see you guys fix that bug.
Yeah, every once in a while, just have to. Although some people enjoy it, like stuff is unintended. And if it's unintended and it also has the potential to throw balance out of whack, which something like this does, given how strong linear fusions are right now, yeah, definitely was something that need to be changed.
Yeah, that's fair to say. All right, so there's a bunch of just really nice exotic buffs here that for the most part, I don't have a lot of questions about, because you pretty much answered all of the questions in the TWAB on these ones. So I don't want to waste a lot of time on them, because we do have a lot of other questions that I want to get to. But just, yeah, some great updates. Overload being added to Le Monarch and Thunderlord. Malfeasance getting unstoppable with its explosions, and also getting that AE buff for being a precision hand cannon. Melf looking more and more attractive every day, and I'm just really bad at invading. So I got to fix that.
It's worth noting that 53 airborne effectiveness is not including the effective extended mag, which it has. So it has 63 airborne effectiveness by default, which means that Malfeasance has no accuracy difference between being on the ground or being in the air at all, just by default, without doing literally anything else.
That is very nice to note. And yeah, a good moment to remind folks that with Radiant, you can 3-tap quite reliably. And if you don't 3-tap somebody, you can 5-tap them very reliably.
And it's a great counter to anybody who has more than 200 health for any reason whatsoever, because 5 slugs into them and they're going to explode. And it doesn't really matter a ton if they're doing anything else. It does quite a bit. Malfeasance is a super fun gun. I really enjoyed that one in playtest, and I've been using it a bit in live too in preparation for this change.
I feel like I finally need to set aside the time to finish the quest, because I think I might need to main this for a while. It looks very appealing. All right, Wish Ender getting anti-barrier, which is very nice. Getting some more hits versus non-player targets. More damage versus champions, majors, mini bosses, getting faster draw time. Wish Ender just getting some big love. Tick use is a lightweight bow. That's a good note. Legend of Acreus. I know that the PvE cast is like mind blown on this one. I don't think anybody saw this buff coming.
Well, Acreus, it's like it says, it's fallen behind like a lot of other stuff. Like we every so often kind of just like look at the list of exotic weapons and we're like, which one hasn't gotten some love in a little bit? Which one is nobody using? Which one does nobody appreciate? And Acris was one of those that just really jumped out of the list. And I've got to say that with Trench Barrel, it does a substantial amount of damage.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've actually never bothered to note the PvP damage that it deals, because if you're in range, you die.
Yeah, enough is pretty much how it works.
It is actually like, I don't usually want to run a heavy shotgun in PvP, but it is on occasion hilarious to just delete someone.
It is very funny for the memes. It really is. Nobody ever expects the Legend of Acris. Under any circumstances do they expect that. Every time, if you were to ever see someone load a heavy shotgun in PvP, you would immediately assume tractor cannon. Nope, Legend of Acris. It's super, super fun. It's hard to justify giving up the exotic slot, but for the memes, it is absolutely one of the funniest guns out there. Yeah. But now it's just straight up good in PvE, so...
Yeah, Trench Barrel is a massive, massive buff for Acris. So that is really gonna. I think people are gonna be doing some math on that one. Glad also to see the mini tools and Drang getting their buffs to bring them in line with the existing ones. I was truly thrown to see the seemingly random differences in the stats when those first came out. So I'm assuming we can probably expect to see this in the future, reprised weapons essentially matching the stat profiles, or is that going to be a case by case?
We try to do it as often as we can. There are some times when we are bringing back a reprised weapon of something that was sunset from a past era, where the thing that was sunset just had like a wildly out of band stat. And like, we probably won't always match those 1-to-1. But the general goal, if we're reprising a weapon, is to try to bring it back stat for stat matched.
All right. Fair enough. Sweet Business getting an airborne effectiveness buff, 5 points, bringing it up to that full, like, I'm pretty sure at 32, it's like at full old Icarus accuracy. So
yep,
I don't love that, but it's there.
You don't want people to be the AC 130?
I don't. Weirdly, I hate that, actually. But I'm happy for the auto rifle lovers, I guess. Fighting Lion, it had a damage buff, which was rolled back. Now it's being reintroduced and increased even further, an 8% damage buff now. And also additional grace time for Thin the Herd, an extra second being thrown on there. Fighting Lion's strong, but people don't use it, so I guess you guys can get away with this.
Well, they used it a lot when it was getting a 20% buff unintended, and it could one-shot with Radiant.
Yeah.
But, yeah, no. I mean, Fighting Lion is a super fun gun, and we'll talk about this when we talk about how we balance stuff later on in the podcast. But, yeah, I mean, I don't think that an 8% damage buff, or we don't think that an 8% damage buff is going to be anywhere near as bad as it was with the unintended 20%. And comparatively, the 5% just didn't really stack up. So it gets a little bit of love here, but I don't think that it's enough to push it back to where it was.
Okay. I'll believe you for now. We'll see. I do like my Fighting Lion. All right. Now we get to the good stuff. People have been waiting. The people who skipped 40 minutes into the podcast are about to strike gold. Let's talk about Lord of Wolves. Lord of Wolves, people have been complaining about all season, Lord of Wolves and Omnioculus. And so it is now getting a PvP nerf. It is getting I guess I would call it a PvE change. I'm not sure yet how to feel about the PvE side, but you do note here, this is part 1 of a larger rework of Lord of Wolves, aimed at giving it some more PvE usefulness without making it strong in PvP again. So the starting ammo comes down. The Release the Wolves perk essentially changes kind of completely in my mind. It's no longer a 10-shot burst. It's now a 5-shot burst, but the burst delay is 60% smaller. So you can fire much more quickly with it. And the base damage is also decreased. Can no longer reliably body people with Lord of Wolves, unless Release the Wolves is active, unless you've already taken somebody out. Contrary-wise, then PvE gets a 20% damage buff to compensate for that. So Lord of Wolves, can you share any details or direction on part 2 of this change? Okay. Oh,
actually,
excellent.
Actually, I can, because I'm the one who's doing the Lord of Wolves change. Although maybe I shouldn't have admitted that. But yeah, so the deal is like, honestly, like Lord of Wolves has kind of been a problem, or like just outside of being a problem, for a really long time in PvP. And it's not something that we actually really want to be meta, because it's kind of it's kind of a weird gun. And that's, and we know this from the spreadsheet. It's not really a shotgun. It's really a super high powered pulse rifle.
Right.
And because of that, it's becoming increasingly hard to like keep it reined in, and like keep it viable in PvP, but also not have it just be like super ridiculously strong. Because what it does is very different than what other shotguns do. And it doesn't function the same way that a lot of other shotguns do. So because of that, like we pretty much just said, okay, let's just make it not the best in PvP, flat out. And in return, let's make it pretty darn good in PvE. So unfortunately, because of the timetable that we were on, we were only able to get part 1 of the change out, which is basically, let's make it not super great in PvP anymore. And so this is just flat out a PvP nerf. We reduce the damage by 20% in PvP. It can no longer kill in strictly body shots. You have to hit a crit. We stopped you from being able to fire 10 shots all at once when Release the Wolves is active. It's now 2 shots with a small delay in between them. And we also reduced the starting ammo that you get in PvP, because again, not a shotgun. It was doing weird things, and it was getting an extra shot, which it really shouldn't have.
Right.
So those things combined, I think, will definitely hurt it in PvP. And we tried to not just, gut it in PvE. So we gave it a 20% damage boost to at least bring the damage back to where it was. In part 2, we have a number of things that we're going to do with it. So the functionality is kind of, instead of Release the Wolves being one larger burst, what we're aiming for is Release the Wolves is going to be an auto rifle, and normal Lord of Wolves is going to be a pulse rifle. So the plan is to basically make it full auto when Release the Wolves is active, and to give it an accuracy bonus when Release the Wolves is active, to make it deal a slight amount less body shot damage, but significantly more crit damage when Release the Wolves is active. And then further increase the damage when Release the Wolves is active. So the fantasy is kind of like use Lord of Wolves in normal mode when you want to kill ads or low value targets. And when you just want to dump a ton of damage into a big target, you swap to Release the Wolves and you just hit the crit spot and you just unload the magazine, right? Right now, Release the Wolves actually has a huge accuracy penalty when you activate it, like an absolutely massive accuracy penalty, which is why it doesn't feel super great to use in PvP. So we're going to scale that down to a level that is more manageable for shooting champions or yellow bars or bosses in PvE, but it's still big enough that it's going to be hard for you to hit targets in PvP with it. So if you want to use it in PvP, you can use it in the normal mode, or you can swap to Release the Wolves to maybe take down like a charging super or something like that. But it's going to burn through your ammo super fast. It's going to be pretty unwieldy, and it's not going to do as much. It's not going to do like any extra bonus damage, but then in PvE it will. So I'm hopeful that we can straddle the line there between the two. But yeah, so part 1 is coming out in season 18. Part 2 is going to come out in the future at some point in time, either mid-season 18 or season 19.
Okay. Well, hey, that's one of those questions where I ask and I don't expect an answer. So that's awesome.
We're trying something new where if we have something that we're pretty confident we're going to move forward with, it may not be exactly, which is why, I'm not giving you straight up numbers.
Right.
But the general direction that we're pushing Lord of Wolves in right now feels pretty good. And so, that's the direction that we're moving in. And I can't guarantee that every single little thing that I said will be as it is when it releases into the live game. But the intent of what we're doing is not super strong in PvP, pretty strong in PvE. And that's what we're doing to try to get there. So, I will say that we are doing more of our sharing future plans now than we ever have at any point in the past. And it's something that I'm personally really excited about because I think it's fun. Obviously, as someone who's in the community and now works at Bungie, like I think it's fun to take a peek behind the curtain and like see what's in development. And I hope that this decision to share a little bit more is something that is well received and something that goes over well. So,
yeah, everybody, remember this one simple rule: don't be a dick. That's all you have to remember. You don't have to love that change. If you were just dying on the hill of Omni Lord of Wolves is totally balanced and fair, I mean, this is not the TWAB for you, but be respectful that that's not the direction the game is going. No, truly though, it's people have been real dicks recently and also not recently. And I hope that we are seeing a turn in general sentiment, like to discourage that kind of behavior. So, and I personally truly appreciate the transparency because I am always trying to peek behind the curtain as to what's going on in Destiny, whether I've got someone to ask questions to or not. So, yeah, I would like to see y'all rewarded for this because I think that you deserve to be. All right. Well, that /end soapbox. But let's, so Lord of Wolves, very, very excited to see movement on that front. And even more excited to get to some of the damage reduction changes in PvP a little bit later. But before we do that, we got to finish up with these exotic weapon changes. Dead Man's Tale is another one that I am actually surprised has not been adjusted in this way sooner. So Dead Man's Tale, Cranial Spike causes issues with unintended damage scalars against players and generally felt unpredictable both to use and to fight against. Wasn't quite landing the hip firing cowboy rifle fantasy as strongly as you wanted, so you reworked it to fast firing hip fire. All that to say, Cranial Spike no longer buffs damage versus players. Instead, it grants increased reload, aim assist, and range. Still grants additional damage versus PvE combatants. And at max stacks of Cranial Spike, Catalyst now increases the hipfire RPM by 50. In other words, it will fire at 180 RPM, but will deal reduced damage per bullet. 20% decrease. I have not yet had a chance to math out what that means, and I do suspect that it will probably be fairly rare in the Crucible, given that you do have to actually max out Cranial Spike to make that happen. But I'm curious, what can you tell us about this change? How does it feel? What's the intended effect on time to kill? Is it intended to be something that is active in the Crucible?
So this wasn't intended to be a nerf or a buff. This was intended to be a lateral movement to a different type of bonus provided by the perk, right? Like the amount that it scales up is actually substantial. It's 4 aim assist, 8 range, and 3% faster reload speed per stack, right? So you can get a hefty amount of aim assist, range, and reload speed for stacking this stuff in PvP. And then you also get the additional damage in PvE against combatants. This was a hard one because the original damage scalars, which we were applying, just weren't functioning consistently the way we wanted them to. But at the same time, we'd also kind of been eyeing DMT for a while about like, this isn't really something that's super predictable to fight against. It's not something that's super predictable. Like the damage amounts that it was dealing were highly variable, even when the perk was working correctly, right? And then in addition to that, there was kind of a different fantasy, which is like gunslinger, shooting fast, whipping the gun around, but increasing the rate of fire to 180 and also continuing to let it just do easy 3 taps against any resilience would have been a problem.
That'd
that's
be
a
no
0.67 time to kill from pretty far away, even in hip fire.
Yeah.
So we did make the decision to bring the damage down a bit to match. We'll see. We'll see how it plays out. We're not. I don't believe that this is the last time we'll ever touch DMT. So I would say, let's just keep an eye on it and respectfully make your feedback heard once you get it in your hands. And if you don't think it feels good, tell us why. Or if you really like it, then tell us that too. And we'll see. Like I said, this is more intended to be a lateral movement than it was a straight nerf. And I think people are reading it as a nerf because the 20%, damage decrease when the rate of fire is faster. But let's let it get out into the sandbox and let's play with it a little bit before we pass strict judgment on it.
Yeah, I think if my back of the envelope math is right, that probably puts the high rate of fire time to kill at like 1 second if you're 4-tapping. So maybe not the optimal maybe not the optimal move in PvP to max out cranial spike. But we'll see how it plays. Collective obligation. So this is one that is, as somebody who kind of is like a primary Crucible player, I just really couldn't care less. But everybody who does PvE is really, really excited right now. And actually, I'm sort of getting excited as well about this for PvE. Because this is kind of a lot of buffs. Like this gun kind of went from like a interesting to this is kind of good. See, the Void Leech timer is now 15 seconds in PvE. The cooldown's gone. 20% damage bonus against PvE combatants while Void Leech is active. Takes less hits to fully charge. Kills against debuff targets instantly charge Void Leech. Also instantly charged when your character is Void debuffed, except by the suppressor grenade. And there's bug also that was fixed. So collective obligation. Talk to me about this change.
I wish I had more detail on this one. This is actually done by the designer who built the gun originally. And he has been out on vacation for the last week, so I had no opportunity to ask him anything specific about questions that I thought people might ask. But from what I understand, he felt the problem was that the perk just didn't have enough uptime and didn't have enough strength, particularly in PvE, and it just wasn't living up to the hype of being a raid exotic weapon. And so his determination in this and the changes he wanted to make were just way more uptime, way more strength. Use this gun in PvE, make it super, super good, make people excited to play with it. And from what I'm hearing, it sounds like he did a pretty good job.
Yeah, I think if that's the target, I think he nailed it. Obviously, we always have to wait till things hit live to fully judge them, but this sounds very good. I think the only question that people were really a little unclear on from the TWAB is if the timer is reset every time you get a debuff kill. And I don't know if that's a question that you can answer, but it reads to me like it is.
I would probably have to ask the designer about that. I don't want to speak for him.
Yeah.
But I will see if I can get clarification on that and let you know at a later point in time.
Cool. Yeah, very good. Well, I think that's also a question that will be answered immediately at launch. So
right. Correct.
So not super urgent or pressing to figure that out. Okay. Up next, a change that I personally am very, very happy to see. This is a change I would honestly like to see more changes along these lines in PvP. Change the damage reduction. So specifically the damage resistance used by Omnioculus and Whisper of Chains. For PvP only, the PvE damage resistance is unchanged, which is something I think a lot of people were concerned that Omnioculus was going to get nerfed and that PvE would pay the price for PvP's sins. And that has not happened, as really honestly has been the case for quite a while. People still worry about you guys like nerfing PvE for PvP's sake, and that just hasn't happened since I feel like it's been a couple years, really, that the changes have been pretty well split.
We do make a conscious effort to split changes where we're not splitting functionality. right? So in this case, we made a move a little while back, not super long. It was actually pretty recent, where we have general damage resistance tiers. And so what we're trying to do moving forward is on new content that provides a general damage resist. So not a specific damage resist, but a general damage resist. We're trying to use one of these tiers because they don't stack on each other. They kind of overlap, right? And so it makes it much, much easier to handle damage resistance stuff. Because of the way we design those, it is not super difficult to split the damage resist between PvE and PvP. Not everything is that easy to do. In this case, the change that we wanted to make aligned with the change that a lot of people in the community were asking for, and also aligned with the fact that we could do it separately for PvP and PvE and retain the same functionality, right? So it provides damage resist in both. So we don't have to change any perk descriptions. We don't have to clarify anything, right? You get damage resist when you're using Omnioculus, no matter where you are. It's just much less in PvP than it is in PvE.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so the big note for me here is Omnioculus going from 25% in PvP down to 10%, which really is the change down to the number was the exact change I was expecting to see, and I think it's a completely fair change.
Yeah, you shouldn't be able to tank special ammo shots anymore. I know there was some consternation that people were able to tank, chaperone headshots and things like that. Shouldn't be able to do that anymore. And also should not have as strong an effect on primary weapon TTKs. It will still change some of them.
Yeah.
But it will be a lot easier to power through that, which I think will make a big difference. And Whisper of Chains, too, is also coming down from 20% to 7.5% because we changed all those tiers, and it was using tier 3, I believe.
Good note. Yes. Yeah, I believe you're correct. I'm concurring with the person who should know. So I think overall, I'm personally extremely happy with this. Things that drastically affect time to kill in the Crucible can be very frustrating for a lot of us who like to spend our time there. And there are some things that I'm not going to press you on today because they're not your area. But yeah, I know there's a lot of stuff that people probably want to ask about, but we're just not going to do it. Let's just say that I won't. There's a artifact mod that I won't miss. As much as I abused it, I won't miss it. So, anyways, we'll look forward to season 18. And now let me just make sure I haven't forgotten any questions I wanted to ask. So you gave me the aim assist, reload speed, and range buffs for Cranial Spike, which I was going to ask about. So I caught 4 points of aim assist per stack, 8 points of range, which is huge. I didn't catch the reload speed, although I really care a lot less about it.
It's 3% per stack.
3%. Oh, and are these percentages or raw stat points?
The first two are raw stat points. The third one is a percentage.
All right, good clarification. I've always liked DMT. There's too many exotics I want to play with. This is why I never get really good with any one. All right, future looking notes. Wow. Talk about burying the lead here. Okay, so reducing shotgun spread randomness. I have to ask, and this was also a similar question was asked by Yvonne, who's been on the show before and does a lot of shotgun testing and has now delayed making more shotgun videos because of this note, which probably is good that he was forewarned to not spend that effort. Are you looking at completely taking randomness out of shotgun shots, or just containing the randomness so they're more predictable patterns?
So this is one of those areas where we're going to share what our plan is, and our plan may change.
All right.
But where we are looking towards right now is we want to completely remove randomness from shotguns. So from shotgun spread, I should say. You can't ever remove randomness from shotguns. There will always be some inherent randomness, because the direction of your target facing you can mean the difference between a kill and not a kill, right? If they're turned slightly to the left, you might get a kill, and if they're facing straight on, you might not. So we can't always remove 100% of randomness. But as far as the spread itself goes, we want the spreads to not be random at all. We want them to be fixed spreads. we are testing those changes right now. We need to make sure that they're functional and that they work in the sandbox and that there's no unintended consequences of that. But the goal would be to completely remove randomness. If we, for some reason, find that we cannot do that, then the backup plan will be we will reduce the randomness as much as we possibly can.
Wow. Mind blown. I wasn't sure if, given what we in the community knew about how shotguns worked, I wasn't sure how feasible it would be to make that happen. I'm curious about the functionality. Is this a full functionality change that you're looking at? Or is it just like constraining the accuracy of each of the different pellets? Like, do they each have their own accuracy cone?
So the way it works is there are rings. Right. And each ring has a wedge. And each wedge then has a width and a depth. And the pellet is fired randomly within one of those wedges. What we discovered, not that anyone cares about the technical details, but what we discovered is that by using different numbers of wedges and different orientations of those wedges, that we could basically build a fixed spread where we basically determined the location of the individual pellets in such a way, right? So it is a moderately substantial amount of work to do it, and it took a bit of outside the box thinking. But we're pretty happy with the results that we've gotten so far. They are in playtests that we're running daily, and I think the results have generally been positive. But playtest success does not entirely equal it's going into the game, because there's a substantial amount of additional work that has to be done behind the scenes to make sure that it's not breaking a bunch of other stuff like HUD artifices and UI and reticles and things like that. So there's a lot more work that goes on outside of just building the spread pattern.
Right.
And we're in the process of verifying that all of that stuff works as intended before we roll this stuff out.
All right. That is, I think, going to be one of the most exciting moments of this episode for a lot of people. Fixed spread patterns, even honest to goodness, highly constrained spread patterns would make a lot of people very, very happy. Fixed, I think, if you're able to pull it off, we'll send some people over the moon. And being able to really predict how a shotgun is going to work. Boy, shotgun testing just got a lot more interesting. All right, we got to keep moving though, because we have so many things to get through. Bow swapping. This one is near and dear to my heart because I am a bow swapper, and it's your fault that I'm a bow swapper, to be completely honest. So I've got to ask, how could you put this in the same TWAB as a buff to the Monarch? No. Anything that you can share about the types of changes that are on the table for reducing the effectiveness of bow swapping? And I have to ask this because I feel like a straight handling nerf or a nerf to stow speed would easily accomplish this, but also might make bows feel pretty bad to play with. And so I'm just curious what kind of levers you have at your disposal that can impact this, or what kinds of things you're looking at.
Well, I can tell you first off that what we're looking at right now is just a straight nerf to stow speed, not to handling as a whole, just the nerf to stow speed.
Yeah.
The reason being is, like we said in the lightweight bow buffs, we want people using the bows to get kills. Blinting dramatically increases the lethality of a bow, and I know because I have 10,000 kills on my Le Monarch and 10,000 kills on my Messenger that I was using to blint with it, right? Like, I have talked a lot about that. I was a super fan of that combo, and it was incredibly effective and incredibly lethal, but that doesn't mean that it necessarily is fair in the sandbox with the way things work, right? Like,
sure,
the point of bows is to clean up already damaged targets, to deal big chunk damage, right, in the hopes that maybe one of your teammates can clean them up, or to use the bow to get the kill, right? Like, generally that's what we're trying to push, is like, use the bow to get the kill. We don't want to entirely remove the hit someone with a bow, swap to your other weapon, but the stow speeds right now are so fast on bows and can be paired with a very fast draw speed on another weapon that at a high level, the stow swap combo was functionally instant, and you could get hit with a bow and be hit with like a hand cannon shot before the damage could even register, and you basically just die instantly, right? And that's not a good experience. And, we know that there are people who enjoy that playstyle, and we're not trying to say, no, you can't swap off your bow and get a cleanup kill. We just want to lower the ceiling for how effective that playstyle can be.
Sure.
So the best way to do that is to just hit the stow speed of bows, because that straight up lengthens that time that it takes you to swap to another weapon.
Yeah.
You can still build into it. You can still make it really, really fast. It takes a little bit more investment. And if you are using the bow as your main weapon, if you are hitting people with 2 arrows or you're using it to clean up ads or damage people, you shouldn't notice that stow speed nerf that much at all. And that's why we didn't hit handling. Because if we had hit handling, it would have been something that you would notice just using the bow. And so we wanted to avoid that. There were other levers we could have tuned. We could have done things like, wild ideas, but like we could have hit other weapons that are used for blinting in combination with bows and like not touch bows at all. But the thing is, there's just like a lot of knock-on effects for that. Way more test wake, like way more opportunity to affect players that aren't even using those things for blinting. And so what it came down to is sometimes the simplest change is the most effective change. And in this case, it's just touching stow speed on bows.
I sort of knew when I asked that was going to be the answer. Like I knew that you couldn't just do a handling nerf because that would actually make bows feel bad. And stow was really the only other thing that I could think of that made sense for hitting blinting. So I'm not surprised, but I am disappointed. That's all right. I just have to get gooder. That's the answer.
You can still do it. It's just going to be a little bit harder.
Yeah. All right. So next up here, you guys are finally getting ready to launch the full auto setting in the near future. I don't know if we've got specific word on the exact timeline for that. I'm guessing nothing is fixed until
Season
it's fixed.
19.
Season 19. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So can you share any details about how full auto is going to work or where we're going to interact with it? Like kind of like how fine tuned, like could you set it on for specific weapon types, specific weapons?
So this first iteration is just going to be a full auto for all weapons setting. So any weapon, when you turn this setting on, all of your weapons will be full auto. This is designed as an accessibility thing. And like, that's it flat out.
I'm not mad about that.
There are future iterations in the works, and I don't have timetables on those that are more granular and more fine tuned. But this first one that's coming out in season 19 is just you flip it on and all weapons are full auto.
I got to be honest. I'm definitely not upset about that. There are 100% loadouts where this will be on for me. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, that was nice and simple. We'll just hit the settings menu, turn on full auto. Mm-hmm. Easy peasy. Okay.
Yep.
And my next question about future facing items. Because I didn't have a lot of questions here as far as the targeted balance changes to some of the PvP outliers, precision fusion rifle, ease of use, high impact scout rifle, ease of use, pulse rifles with out of band effectiveness. I don't know. Well, we can get into those if you've got info that you can share.
The only thing that I kind of want to bring up is like, I know people read small targeted changes and they're like, oh, well, I don't like this particular archetype. Why aren't they nerfing it? It's oppressive or it's overpowered. But in conjunction with some of the other changes that we're making, the gap between what is currently considered oppressive by some players will narrow, right? So like what we don't want to do is absolutely destroy precision fusion rifles. Give shotguns fixed pellet spread, and then shotguns become much stronger and precision fusion rifles are now totally useless. Right. So instead what we want to do is in the nearer future, make some small targeted changes that do address specific pain points of the archetypes that we don't feel like are going to be addressed by other weapons potentially being brought up. Then make the changes to the other weapons, see how those shake out in the sandbox, and reevaluate the balance. Right. So that's all I want to say. Like, that's why we're not going to be totally destroying any of these archetypes that are mentioned there or any of the subfamilies that are mentioned there. We are just going to be taking small, little shavings off the top, so to speak, from specific things in preparation for larger changes coming into the overall sandbox. And then we'll reevaluate once all that stuff is in place. It's kind of like, what is happening with the 3.0s, right? Where we have 3 subclasses that are 3.0s and 1 that's not. Well, the sandbox balance will be much easier to evaluate when all of the subclasses are 3.0s.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Well, yeah. So I didn't want to, I guess, press you too hard on those specifically, which I think maybe people expected me to, but that felt like the kind of thing where there's probably a bunch of stuff you're looking at that is not settled in stone. I don't want to try to pull out too much future-looking info that could change.
Some of that stuff is changing daily.
Yeah.
Like the pulse rifle and scout rifle stuff literally changed today after a series of playtests concluded for this week. And I was like, actually, I think we need to do this, this, and this. So it's hard. Like those things, I don't want to talk about because our plans are so up in the air.
Right.
That I could tell you something tonight and tomorrow it's different. And then Monday it's different again. We try a lot of different iterations of things until we feel like we're at a spot where we've got a good feeling for it. And one of the things I used to even say this when I was on the podcast, but we playtest the game a lot, like a lot at Bungie. We're only at work 8 hours a day, and I am probably playtesting Destiny between on the low end, like an hour and a half to 2 hours a day of like playing during work, and on the high end, like 4 hours a day. But there's only 1,000 something people at Bungie, and even if all of us were playtesting for 4 hours a day every day, the community still plays more in the first 15 minutes of a release being live than we have in like the entire year preceding that. So, what's always best is like we make a bunch of really fluid changes until we feel like something's in a good spot in our playtest, and we playtest the heck out of it. But the real work comes when we put it out into the actual game, and within that first day, the feedback is like a tidal wave.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's kind of how a lot of this stuff ends up going on, right? Like we buffed scout rifles, and within like 2 weeks of us buffing 150 scout rifles, like we'd gotten a lot of feedback on this. And now, it hasn't been super long, and like we're acting on that feedback. And the goal isn't to destroy 150 scouts, because like we actually think that it's nice that like 150 scouts have a place on longer range maps now.
Yeah.
That, certain maps come up and 150 scouts are good, because in previous metas, even on long range maps, most people didn't use them. But at the same time, we don't necessarily want Jade Rabbit making up 12% of all trials kills on a given weekend. So
I just want to say that I think a lot of that had to do with that also being a freelance weekend, because my experience was that most of those Jade Rabbit kills, at least the ones I participated in the matches for, could have easily been avoided if people would have just not played outside on that map. Like all you had to do was just not run outside, and you would have lived. It
definitely had to do with the map and the way that map was laid out, and the fact that it was freelance. Like there were a bunch of things that contributed to it, because then we see Endless Veil come up, and Jade Rabbit is nowhere really to be seen.
Yeah.
Right. And the people that are using it aren't necessarily super effective with it. But at the same time, when we buffed Jade Rabbit, the goal of those changes was to increase the body shot damage and get it out of that horrible window where it was taking 2 seconds to kill with body shots, and make it a little bit more forgiving. And I thought that the resilience gate for the 2 crit 1 body was going to be enough to where 2 crit 1 bodies wouldn't be super prevalent. But they're actually trending to be way more common. And so because of that, it's got a 0.8 second time to kill. That's pretty fast.
Yeah.
The downside to it, because it has basically unlimited range, the downside to 150s is supposed to be that they require 100% crits. And shifting them to 67% crits makes them way, way easier to use.
Yeah.
So, that should give you some idea of kind of where we're looking. And like the goal is not to put 150s back to where they were before the patch. And there are some people who would argue that 150s were fine before the patch, it's just people don't know about them. But the goal is to try to keep the improvements we made to the body shot TTK and the non-optimal forgiveness, but retain the higher crit percentage for the optimal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. All right. Well, so we've gone and said we weren't going to talk about it. We've gone and talked about it, but let's roll through the last couple items here and then try to get through some other pressing questions. This is going to turn into a 3-hour podcast if you let me. So, Glaves, I don't, and this is one where I wasn't sure you were going to be able to tell me anything. I'm curious if there's any light that you can shed on what's up with Glaive hit registration.
It's basically that projectiles that are not hit scan, so projectiles that have like velocity and travel time, are much more difficult to get to behave correctly over the network. And these just happened to fall into a window where they were just causing all kinds of weird issues. And like I said, they just weren't behaving correctly over the network. So we have fixed that. We have addressed it, and they should be much more reliable in terms of their hit detection now.
So you guys have worked it out. Can you tell me when we're going to see that?
It's going to... I actually don't know. I would imagine because of the complexity of the issue, it probably won't be until season 19, but don't take me on my word for that. If we end up spending the next, few weeks or a month testing it and everything shakes out just like all peachy keen, then we might be able to pull it up. But generally, like mid-season patches are for the least risky changes that we can make.
Sure.
And we save like the riskier, more complicated stuff for the full season patch, like the season 19 patch. So,
all right, fair enough. Yeah, well, I have to say my impression of Glaive hit registration has been that it is very complicated. I had a feeling it was to do with network connections between players, and player authority over their locations. I know that's very important to the way that Destiny's PvP interactions work. So,
well, in terms of player location, not to get too deep into it, because I would legitimately need like one of the sandbox engineers to go over it. But this kind of tracks with another question that we have later. So I'll just briefly say, so the game tries to prioritize the shooter's game state for where the target is, right? And like, obviously there can be a disconnect, but the game tries as hard as it can to prioritize the client's perspective. So the person who pulls the trigger where the target is on their screen, the game tries to prioritize that.
Yep.
Right. So I know that that's like kind of something that has like made the rounds in the community and like has kind of gotten, beat up a little bit, that players aren't sure really what's going on. But this game, like most shooters, this is not really unique to Destiny, but like most shooters, it tries to prioritize the person who is pulling the trigger looking at the victim, because the feeling is that it feels worse to have your aim over a target and think you got a hit and then have the network say, nope, that wasn't a hit. Then the alternative, which is you think you're behind cover, you're not behind cover on the shooter's thing, and then you get killed and you're behind cover. So when you think about it that way, like you can probably see which way it prioritizes, because stuff like that does tend to happen in online shooters.
Yeah, I think that's probably a stance that if people think about it, they can sympathize with. It makes a lot of sense in terms of the experience. I would rather be shot behind cover than have a shot miss for no apparent reason. All right, so I've been told I can't ask about the enhanced perks, so I'm not going to ask about the enhanced perks, but I am excited about the enhanced perk reworks. I can ask about the spec mods. So the note here is folding spec mods into the base perks. And my question fundamentally is, what do you mean by that?
So the spec mods provide bonuses to Rampage, Dragonfly, Surrounded. We are just making those bonuses the base behavior of the perk. So Rampage will just last longer, Dragonfly will just do more damage, and Surrounded will...
Wow.
I don't even remember what Surrounded is. But yeah, those are just going to be functionality in the base perk, and those mods are just going to go away.
Surrounded Glaives just got a heck of a lot better. Lego's going to be very excited to hear that. Okay. All right, cool. So it's okay. So I wasn't sure which spec mods you meant in this note either. I was like, are the boss spec mods getting folded into Vorpal, or like what's going on here? Okay. So it's Rampage, Surrounded, Dragonfly, just straight up buffs to those perks coming in the pipeline. Very exciting. Cool. Well, this truly is just like a very, this TWAB is all gravy, dude.
I'd say a large portion of it.
Wow. Okay. All right. So before we dive into a bunch of community questions, I wanted to get some quick hits on important subjects from the Solstice update, which I know you didn't have a lot of contributions to because you were still fairly new at that point, but I'm hoping that you can shed a little bit of light on some things. So first up, one question that I wanted to touch on was airborne accuracy and aim assist. And I'm wondering, if you can share some info for everybody here on how the scaling is working for accuracy and aim assist, because it's pretty clear that they're scaled separately. They are each doing their own thing. When you're getting those airborne effectiveness stat points, they're contributing to accuracy and aim assist in different ways. And I thought that everyone would kind of appreciate having a better understanding of how that works. It's pretty clear that the recent buff to airborne effectiveness has largely quieted the masses in terms of overwhelming complaints. While there are still frequent grumblings, it's a lot less vociferous than it was before.
I think at least as far as primary weapons go, the main criticism that we see right now is not as much I was aimed at the target and missed as it is that would have been a headshot on the ground or in season 16 and it wasn't. And that's because the accuracy is actually extraordinarily high in air on primary weapons right now, like higher than it has ever been in Destiny's history by far. And it's really just the aim assist that has been scaled down. So a lot of the common suggestions we heard were like, oh, well, just give it perfect accuracy in the air and let the AE stat scale aim assist. And that's pretty close to what it is now. It's obviously not perfect accuracy at 0 because we don't want it to be perfect accuracy with no investment at all. But the accuracy is very, very high. So I'm going to give you some numbers here. Those of you who are taking notes, now's a good time to get out a pen and a piece of paper, right? So a hand cannon with 100 range, by default, the accuracy cone is 0.3 degrees, right? At 100 aim assist, the aim assist cone is 3 degrees. Massive, right? So basically 10 times the accuracy cone. That's on the ground. That is the reason why so many shots feel like headshots in this game. Is the accuracy cone is very, very, very small, right? So the bullet doesn't have a ton of randomness, and the aim assist cone is massive. So if the head is anywhere within that aim assist cone, it yanks the accuracy cone over to the head, and that's why you get a headshot, right? When you are airborne, that aim assist cone gets very, very teeny tiny, right? And what was happening in season 17 pre-solstice is that the aim assist penalty is actually just it just subtracts straight up from whatever the aim assist cone is in the air. Well, what was happening is, although the change in that penalty was linear, the penalty was so big that it basically just functionally bottomed out the aim assist cone all the way up until like the very highest reaches of the penalty. And then you start to get the aim assist cone back, right? So what we did is we shifted that penalty basically like down. So now you start feeling your aim assist come back in at a much earlier point in time in the curve than you did before. So still linear. You still end up with, the same size aim assist cone that you had in the air in season 16. But the massive, massive investment that you had to put in to start feeling aim assist is much lower now. So, you can start feeling aim assist pretty soon, whereas before, you could be at like 60 or 70 before you started feeling aim assist. Now it's probably like 30 or 40, somewhere around there before you start feeling it. And then it just gets much more effective at the higher levels. So that's aim assist. So accuracy is actually the part that I want to talk more about. I'm super glad that someone had a question about this. So I told you the accuracy cone is 0.3 degrees, right? So now we're going to talk about accuracy penalties, right? These get added to the accuracy cone. In season 16, the airborne accuracy penalty was 0.67 degrees, right? So your accuracy cone more than basically tripled in size when you jumped in the air. The accuracy penalty now at 10 AE, which is pretty much the lowest AE any primary can get, is 0.3 degrees. So what actually has happened is, with no investment at all, your accuracy penalty is less than half of what it was in season 16. And this is what I say, or this is what I mean when I say that guns are much more accurate in the air now than they've ever been. We chopped those accuracy penalties in half, and then we even further reduced them. Now at, say, 20 AE, which is pretty darn achievable, right? With almost no investment at all. Most guns can get to 20 AE incredibly easily, even like the worst guns, base AE guns out there. In fact, most guns can get to 25 to 27 pretty much just by putting an Icarus mod on there. Your accuracy penalty is 0.24 degrees. In season 16 Icarus on a hand cannon, it was 0.17 degrees. So even without doing anything at all, other than just being at 20 airborne effectiveness, you were only 7/100ths of a degree below where you were in season 16 with Icarus in terms of accuracy, right? And that's with not doing anything. Pretty much if you put Icarus on any primary weapon, you're going to be over that amount.
Yeah, especially the ones that already have high base airborne effectiveness.
So at 40 AE, the accuracy penalty is 0.12 degrees. So that is 5/100ths of a degree under where Icarus was in season 16. And this is just 40 aerial effectiveness, right? 40 aerial effectiveness, especially with some of the changes that we most recently made, is not exactly hard to get to. And then at 60 AE, you obviously have no airborne accuracy penalty at all. You just have the same accuracy that you did on the ground. So where we are at right now in terms of aerial effectiveness is that your guns are more accurate than they've ever been in the past in the air, even with not a ton of investment or even with comparative investment, right? Part of the goal of the system when we worked on the curve was to keep the accuracy of a gun with Icarus pretty comparable to a gun with Icarus in season 16, right? Accuracy wise, and to then dramatically increase the accuracy of a gun without Icarus to kind of make up the difference. But in order to give that increase in accuracy, we had to reduce aim assist. Otherwise, we would have had the opposite effect and just everybody would have been airborne all the time.
Right.
Which the game doesn't play well like that. So what we have done is we have done a form or a variant of the just let aerial effectiveness scale aim assist. Most of what aerial effectiveness does now, comparatively, it gives you much bigger chunks of aim assist than it does of accuracy. The accuracy changes are very small at this point. It's hard to notice 5 or 6 points of aerial effectiveness in terms of accuracy. You can't even really see it when you jump in the game and you look at the reticle expansion. And instead, the aim assist is the much more effectively changed part of aerial effectiveness, if that all makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me. Wow. Okay. So lots of notes for this episode. Very good. All right. So to ask an even more charged question than that one, there's kind of a related vein of discussion that always sparks a spirited debate. And while I'm wary of platform wars, I do want to ask what you can tell us about the differences between mouse and keyboard and controller. Because obviously, especially, for people who are maining the game on PC, as I often do these days myself, there's always a lot of discussion about which input method is better. And my impression has long been that it sort of depends on what you're trying to do and what you value as a player, but that they do both. That there are some significant differences between the two, which I've certainly shared what I think the differences are, which sparked a response. I would say, some people think I was very wrong. I'm curious what you can tell me about how right or wrong I have been by just putting some numbers on it for people.
Yeah, so there are definitely differences between mouse and keyboard and controller. Pretty substantial differences. I don't believe that there's one better input device than the other. I believe that both input devices have their strengths and have their weaknesses. I've heard a bunch of people say that tracking and SMGs just feels so much better on controller than it does on mouse and keyboard, or sniping feels better on controller than it does on mouse and keyboard. And then I've heard other people say, shotgunning, hand cannons, pulse rifles feel better on mouse and keyboard than they do on controller. I think there's strengths to both input devices, and I actually think that they're, pretty well balanced given how different they really are. But there are some inherent differences in how the game treats the two input devices and what it does. So starting with controller, what controller has that mouse and keyboard does not is reticle friction, what we refer to as magnetism. That is the slowing down of your reticle as it nears a target, and the friction as it rolls over a target, and the stickiness if the target moves where it wants to pull your reticle along with the target, right? Now that is the reason that exists on controllers is an accessibility thing. You have much less precision using thumbsticks than you do using a mouse in terms of where you can, point your reticle. And so magnetism exists because it basically makes first-person shooters playable. on controller.
So the example I always give to people here is the little flying drones, especially on Europa. These are all over the place. The little flying Clovis Bray. Wow. Oof. Need to hydrate here. There is no aim assist when you try to aim at those. And so trying to shoot those with a controller is an experience, and also tells you just exactly how difficult it is to actually shoot a small moving target without aim assist. That's a pretty accurate description of how to tell what magnetism is doing for you?
Yep, almost entirely.
Okay.
Now, both input devices have what is called auto aim, and auto aim is what is also referred to as bullet bending. It is the cone. We talked about it on hand cannon up above when I gave those numbers, the 3-degree cone surrounding the 0.3-degree cone. And what it does is when there is a target within that cone, it pulls the accuracy cone over to that target, at least as far as it can. And then when you fire the shot is randomly fired within the accuracy cone, right? So one thing that I do want to clarify is that if you are aimed at a target, say a target is stationary, you are aimed dead center on its head, aim assist actually doesn't do anything there because you are already aimed at the target's head. So the aim assist has nowhere to pull the accuracy cone. It does not affect the bullet inside the accuracy cone when the bullet is fired, right? The only thing that auto aim does is pull the accuracy cone. Then when you pull the trigger, the bullet and the accuracy cone do their own thing. They function independently. That's something I want to clarify. So what mouse and keyboard has that is different than controller is they have a number of scalars that are applied. Mouse and keyboard has approximately 20% better accuracy. It has approximately 20% better stability. And then depending on the weapon type, it has between 10 and 20% more auto aim. So like I said, there are scalars that are applied behind the scenes. This is something that was set up long, long ago and is like inherent into the way Destiny feels on mouse and keyboard. But again, mouse and keyboard has about 20% better accuracy. So the accuracy cone is smaller on mouse and keyboard. The numbers that I gave you earlier, the 0.3 degrees for hand cannon, that's the base. That's what controller has. So mouse and keyboard has a 0.8 scalar applied to that, right? So I think that makes it, like 0.24 degrees or something like that. Better stability. So if your gun were to recoil straight up, 10 feet on controller, with mouse and keyboard, it would recoil straight up 8 feet over the same amount of shots, right? And then it also has better auto aim. And again, that's weapon dependent, but it varies between 10% and 20%. So the auto aim cone is 10% to 20% bigger.
Well, so I'm not going to tell people I told you so, but
this stuff has, I guess we haven't ever actually confirmed it, but people have done testing in game and notice these things, right? It's not like it's a secret. I guess this is just the first time that we're saying it, but people have done testing in game and noticed this stuff.
Yeah, I always wondered if it was just something that Bungie was staying away from because it could spark some arguments between people or give people fuel for give kind of the platform warriors fuel. But I appreciate the transparency. Because these are two wildly different input methods, and it would not make sense for them to work identically. The problems that you have on mouse and keyboard versus the problems you have with a controller are different problems.
It's not that we were avoiding it. I just don't think we've ever been asked this question on one of the places where we would answer this type of stuff, right? I think had it been asked previously on Massive Breakdowns, we probably would have gotten an answer. Had it been asked firing range, you just got to ask the right questions, right?
Just got to know what to ask. Well, I'm glad that I decided to just throw it in because it was a bit random. It wasn't super related to anything else here, but I was like, you know what? Let's see if we can get an answer on this because it has been a long-standing debate. So I'm really glad that we're able to. I don't know that we put the debate to rest, but at least we put some numbers on the debate as to which input method is better, and I think. I feel pretty vindicated in a lot of the stuff that I was saying about the differences between the two. All right, well that's good. I feel good. Thank you for clarifying that. Next question. I think this is on a lot of people's minds. When can we look forward to more perks and mods that influence airborne effectiveness, and what kind of trade-offs does the team think are fair when building into airborne effectiveness?
So season 19 is when a lot of that stuff is going to come online. For a mod, the trade-off would generally be you have to sacrifice something equally potent. We may experiment with artifact mods in future seasons. No promises about any of that stuff at all.
Right.
Simply because those plans are still to be droll up in the air. But yeah, for a perk, it would be less of a trade-off. Generally, left column perks are like fuel perks, like handling and reload speed and stability and stuff like that, unless they're like a really massive bonus. So it would probably go there, which isn't really going to be a huge trade-off. The trade-off is basically you can't have another perk. That's kind of how we balance perks against each other, is like, is this worth taking over whatever else could be in this column?
That's where Air Assault certainly falls for me, is the trade-off with having Air Assault is that I don't have a different perk.
Plan is to probably give Air Assault another look. Don't think it's really hitting the mark. The +10 neutral AE helps, but the activator is still just a super unpopular activator, especially compared to what else you could have in that column. So I think we'll probably give Air Assault another look.
Interesting. All right. Okay, so looking back to the Solstice changes, bunch of damage buffs to a bunch of different weapons. I am curious, what's the internal talk here in terms of the precision hand cannons, precision ARs, precision scouts, high impact scouts, and kind of all the rest here? What's the feeling on terms of, do you think those changes have hit the mark? Did they largely achieve your goals once they're actually out in the wild now, or can we expect more looks in that area?
It's still super early. Like comparatively after the release, like the sandbox is still shaking out and will continue to shake out into the middle of season 18. So it's hard to say like deterministically right off the bat whether or not we hit the mark. I would say for 180 hand cannons and scout rifles, I think based off what we see right now, we at least came close, meaning that the mark was easier to use for lower, at lower skill levels. Situationally very good at higher ones. If anything, they may be a little under, but I don't think they seem to be in desperate need of work. It seems like the people who enjoy using them like really enjoy using them, which is good.
Yeah.
They don't seem like if you put one on, you feel like you are totally shooting yourself in the foot in PvP anymore, which is good. And they're also not meta, which is good because we did not want them to be straight up like the best guns in PvP.
Yeah.
So...
all right.
Let's see. For precision ARs, as it stands right now, like I actually think both precision ARs and high impact ARs are a little bit slept on, but it's not entirely their fault. I think ARs just across the board are still a little bit under where we'd maybe like them to be. Might want to revisit in the future, but we'll talk about this there's a future question somewhere down below asking about auto rifles, and we'll talk about it then.
Fair enough.
I don't know that we'll hit precision ARs specifically again immediately, but yeah, I don't know that they're doing quite as well as I would like them to be, or as we would like them to be. 150 scouts, I talked about this earlier, probably gave them a little bit too much juice. Like the point of the change was really get the body shot damage up and make them a little bit more forgiving outside of the 3 crit optimal. So your combinations of bodies and crits to get a kill, your just body shot kills, we want them to be more forgiving there. Didn't really want them to be potentially as forgiving as they are right now. I just think, being totally honest, like the 2 crit 1 body is too easy to hit on 150 scouts right now. So those are maybe a little over. I think it's really, really apparent on long range maps, which we have a lot of right now.
Yeah.
How strong they can be. At the same time, kind of our thought process when we made this change was 150 scouts have not been meta pretty much ever. So if we give them a little bit too much juice and people start to use them, people start to like them, and we're confident that we can come in and make a change to, take a little bit off the top pretty quickly, it's not going to be the worst thing ever. We just kind of got unlucky with the trials map rotation that immediately followed, where it was Eternity like a week later.
Yeah, a lot of moving parts to track, as I think you've mentioned a couple times. So yeah, that I think that sort of was setting people up to get annoyed by it, but I don't know. All right. Last question kind of about those changes before we start diving into some of the other questions from the community here. Lorentz driver nerfs. Mission accomplished, or do you do you feel like this is still a problem child going forward?
The first thing I want to clarify is like we did not buff Lorentz Driver flinch in PvP.
Oh, yeah.
We got a bunch of reports back afterwards because of the way it was phrased in like the patch notes that we had accidentally decreased the flinch in PvP. We looked at the data and like, that's not the case. So I think flinch just has like an inherent randomness to it, and it can pretty easily feel like flinch is less or like you're shooting through flinch more often. Linear fusion rifles as a whole are just much easier to shoot through flinch with than any other gun. They still flinch the appropriate amount comparatively, right? So first off, like we have investigated that claim and looked at evidence and looked at the numbers and looked at the data, and we did not decrease flinch for Lorentz Driver in PvP. Secondary part of the question, like it's less of a problem than it was before, but we definitely still have an eye on it. It is I'll say this, problem child was in the question. I think problem child is a good description for this gun.
That's how I felt about it for a while.
I feel like most of the issues are not Lorentz Driver issues anymore. They're issues that are inherent to the entire class, right? It's linear fusion rifle issues. And it is highlighted on Lorentz Driver because Lorentz Driver is a special weapon and thus has much more uptime.
Right.
I actually think the distance between Arbalest and Lorentz Driver in terms of usability in PvP has narrowed pretty dramatically now. And I think that Lorentz Driver still gets the most attention, but Arbalest probably shares a lot of the same things that make it frustrating to play against. So it's definitely something that we have an eye on. And as we mentioned in the future looking section, like we are looking at the ability for, to limit how much snipers can shoot through flinch. If that change ends up being something that is successfully rolled out and seems like it had the desired effect, then we could conceivably, and this is no promises at all, but we could conceivably look at expanding that to other weapons which also share, similar characteristics. So
sure.
I'm 100% not making any promises there because we still have a lot of work to do on the sniper flinch stuff. I definitely don't want to pat ourselves on the back and say, we solved Lorentz Driver, it's totally fine now. Because I don't think it is. I still feel that it can be really frustrating to play against, especially in the hands of certain players. So we definitely have an eye on it.
I'll say, and this is just my pitch, but I feel like sound design for me is the biggest difference maker in playing against Lorentz versus playing against Arbalest. Because Arbalest, I always distinctly hear before I get disintegrated. And Lorentz, I often don't hear at all. I just get disintegrated. And I don't know what it is, but I feel like the sound team could maybe do some things to help when someone is pre-charging Lorentz around a corner. That has been, honest to goodness, that has been my feeling about Lorentz from drop. That the sound is like my biggest annoyance, that I don't hear it. I just get disintegrated. And then I'm like, what happened? Oh, Lorentz. So it's frustrating because it's surprising. Arbalest kills me and I'm like, yeah, I shouldn't have peeked. That was on me.
I will also say, if you want to make a gun just like straight up hated, make it good and then make it have a unique firing sound or like a unique effect sound or an activator sound, because the sound that the gun makes as it kills someone will like trigger and like lock into their head and will make people much more upset about being killed by stuff because they might not notice the kill feed, but they will for sure notice the sound.
This could just be my personal psychology, but like I would rather hear the charging sound because then I feel like I have more counterplay against Arbalest because I can hear it charging from like a mile away. So anyways, maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm just special brained and it is what it is. All right, I'm going to let it go. We've got a ton of questions, so I've bolded the ones that I wanted to prioritize, and we'll just see how many we can get through before.
We can burn through these. You can just read them all.
Let's just do it. So we had a question from Bryce. Any intentions of adjusting or reworking 600 RPM SMGs? They sit in a weird place for time to kill in comparison to other archetypes. That's obviously a bit of a loaded question there, offering a strong opinion, but is that something you're looking at?
So right now it's not something we're looking at for two reasons. One, other SMG subfamilies are potentially overperforming. Like they're super, super strong right now. Lightweights and aggressives in particular are both very good.
Yeah.
And if we were to potentially bring those down in the future, that would give precisions a little bit more breathing room. And secondary, if we were to do anything to precisions, we would probably have to cut Shiura's down a bit, because despite precisions not being super great, Shiura's is still dominant. So we definitely could not do anything to 600s without touching Shiura's.
Yeah, it still pushes that 30 meters. So yeah, quite good. Okay. Somebody asking, when can we see a PvE buff to Sweet Business? Oh, this is also coming from Bryce. Bryce asking all these questions about the auto fire. Sweet Business just got an airborne effectiveness buff. I think
what more do you need, Bryce? Come on, that's useful in PvE. No, I mean, I don't know that anybody would use it seriously anyways, even if we did do one of those two things. Like it's a hard ask to get people to use primary exotics in PvE, as you saw with us giving them a 40% damage buff across the board. And I don't know. I mean, I imagine if we would, it would be something ridiculously silly or goofy like Firefly or something like that. We do have like a pass on catalyst functionality coming at some point in time down the road. Could maybe be included in that. But I mean, what would you want to see if we had to give Sweet Business something?
Well, I mean, so I think he had a pitch here for adaptive munitions, and I feel like that actually is not a bad direction to go in, given the magazine size on Sweet Business. That would sort of make sense.
But does that fit the fantasy of Sweet Business being one of the most ridiculous guns in existence? Because I feel like whatever perk it gets needs to be equally ridiculous to like go along with it.
Then just give it like Overflow or Ambitious Assassin and just let it have 500 rounds in the magazine.
Yeah, that we got a taste of that with the original Solstice, didn't we?
We did get a little taste of that, and it was entertaining. All right, any steps planned to carve out a unique niche for auto rifles in the competitive landscape of Destiny 2, where they're not overshadowed by submachine guns, pulse rifles, and hand cannons? This question from Phaeton.
In the competitive landscape of Destiny 2, probably not so much, because auto rifles have some pretty major inherent downsides to them. They're range limited compared to hand cannons and pulses. They are not super great in the air compared to hand cannons in particular. They require line of sight to deal damage, which hand cannons, pulses, and scouts don't have to do, right? They also don't kill as fast as SMGs do because they have more range than SMGs. And in fact, they actually already have quite a niche, which is that they are up there with hand cannons for consistently the most used primary weapon by new and low skill players. They are extremely well used in that cohort, and they're great like beginner introductory weapons. Now, at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, are we satisfied with where auto rifles are? No, not really. But what we don't want, similar to the way that we don't really want a pure scout rifle meta, we do not want a pure auto rifle. We had hard light for a couple weeks, and that was not super fun. So,
we had a Uriel's Gift meta way back in season 2 or 3.
And you'll notice that what makes auto rifles able to compete is when they have ridiculously out of band range, which both of those did. Yeah. Or like hard light was also killing way too fast and had ridiculous range, which is why it was so incredibly dominant for that period of time. So what will we probably do? We might take a pass on auto rifle ease of use. I actually feel like at least precisions and high impacts, adaptives, so. I actually feel like their damage output is pretty fine. We might take a pass at just ease of use or general gun feel. And like I mentioned before, some subfamilies of SMGs are performing pretty hot right now. And we've kind of been loathsome to bring them down because they're not really a problem. And also because like right now, some of our longer range weapons are pretty hot. Yeah. So like we're kind of okay with there still being some hot short range options too. But in a world where out of band pulse rifles come down and some scout rifles come back down, probably we don't need SMGs to be as strong as they are. And if those come down and auto rifles get a little bit more ease of use or a little bit more gun feel, then potentially that opens up, the 20 meter to 30 meter or the 25 meter to 35 meter, depending on the subfamily of auto rifle. Potentially that opens that up for them to feel a little bit better in it. But the goal is not to have auto rifles competing with pulse rifles and hand cannons for their share of the competitive meta.
Right. Okay. Well, fair enough. I feel like that's kind of always where auto rifles have been. And honestly, I feel like the biggest problem that auto rifles have is submachine guns. It's not, I don't think it's the other weapons. I think it's that submachine guns are just very rangy right now.
Yeah, they absolutely are.
Yeah.
Like, we are aware of it, but we have priorities the same way anyone does. And there are things that are causing problems in the sandbox right now. And it's, it's not like we're blind to certain segments of it. It's just that we feel like it makes more sense to prioritize certain targets first, see once those targets come down, how the rest of the stuff shakes out. And we have a suspicion that those will be, potentially next on the list.
Yeah. All right. Well, and we've got some auto rifle changes happening. So I'm curious to see how those play out and how those might affect the equation here. But let's move on here. We've got a bunch of other weapons related questions. Hand cannons. This one's a bit out there from Adams Down Boy. Any chance of the Lumina Catalyst giving the ability to res an ally remotely with noble rounds, maybe only when holding max noble rounds, so you can't use it effectively in trials? Specifically thinking of Grandmasters when somebody dies in an awkward spot, so to speak.
That would be probably extraordinarily difficult to make happen. I don't even know if we have the technology to allow a remote res via weapon projectile like that. I mean, it's a cool idea, but I think that would be an extreme amount of work for that, and also potentially very game breaking.
That's fair. Okay. Can we expect any further changes in the pipeline to differentiate aggressive hand cannons from adaptive hand cannons?
Nothing is planned for now, either buffs or nerfs to any hand cannon subfamilies. We're actually pretty happy with where hand cannons are on their own. And we think that when we touch some out of band pulse rifle stuff and potentially scout rifles, be fine on their own. So we have no plans to buff or nerf any hand cannon subfamilies.
Okay, sidearms. So there actually had a lot of questions about sidearm balance. And I'm gonna credit caller here for asking about them, because the other folks who asked about them have already been credited. They know who they are. What exactly does Bungie feel to be the right place for sidearms, especially on PC? Are there any intended changes coming for sidearm zoom or range so that they aren't so constrained, they can better compete with SMGs and special weapons?
We think sidearms are very close to in the right place, especially on controller. We are looking at potentially pushing out the distance at which auto aim falls off to match the ratios on other primary weapons. We think that is a change which isn't going to up their lethality necessarily, but will make them easier to use, particularly on mouse and keyboard. So that's probably where we're going to look at. But we think sidearms are very, very close to on the edge of being probably a lot better than people would expect them to be. And so we're very hesitant to push sidearms too far, especially in terms of anything that increases lethality.
Yeah, that's honestly, for me, the biggest frustration with sidearms has been that I just want them all to feel like Drang. But only Drang has that 14 zoom value. Everything else has 12. And that's always been, I guess, like just an open question for me, why Drang is so special.
Yeah. And Drang is probably a little out of band on the top. So the goal would probably be, like a lot of things we do, would be to bring up the bottom ones. We just did this with SMGs, right? Like bring up the bottom ones to be closer to Drang, and then just bring Drang down just a small bit, so that all sidearms feel better and Drang is a little bit closer to the rest of the sidearms. Because I don't think we want every sidearm to be as good as Drang, because if they were, that would be a scary world. But yeah, I mean, Drang is probably my most used energy primary in PvP right now. So
it's very solid. It is very, very solid for sure. All right, trace rifles. We had a question from Impetus. Is Divinity's usage, particularly in raids, within the sandbox team's expected parameters? Is there a worry that it feels necessary to complete master or day one raids?
Again, I'm not the PvE balance guru on this, but what I can say is that as a team, we have it on the radar. It is something that we are looking at and talking about, but we do not have a concrete plan of action for it at this moment.
Okay. All right. Fusion rifles. What are the current thoughts on rapid fire fusions after this latest season? Basically, I think the question here is leading to, do you think you went too far on rapid fire fusions, or do you think they're in a good spot now?
Do I think we went too far? No, because we tried every step up to this point, and they were still super strong, right? And if the options are a rapid fire fusion meta in PvP or not a rapid fire fusion meta in PvP, we took the safer route, which is the not a rapid fire fusion meta in PvP. When we made the most recent changes to the other fusion rifle subfamilies and to shotguns in playtest, rapid fire fusions were an easy choice, and they were extremely, extremely strong. And we tried a whole bunch of different combinations of changes to them. And this is the one that we settled on, which was the one that actually made, people stop picking them and stop dominating with them. I think that in the hands of a skilled player, they're still an option. I think that we will revisit them in the future when the other special weapon changes come to pass. Because I can imagine a world where if shotguns become more consistent, rapid fire fusions no longer really have any place. But we were just very reticent to allow weapons that kill at 15 meters to charge in near a third of a second, right?
Sure.
Anything under a half second in PvP is really, really fast charge. And they were definitely spooky. So we did what we felt we had to, and I think that where we ended up is better than where we could have been had we not done it. Because if you think that precision fusion rifles are annoying, the shoe could have very much been on the other foot.
Yeah, my good old Cartesian was very much on the verge of being a weapon that I could not stop using before the most recent changes, and now it's just inconsistent enough, even with its way out of band aim assist, that I still don't pick it very often anymore. So I guess you hit the mark. I'll be curious to see what happens after season 19, because I know you guys have a lot of big changes coming to us over the next couple of seasons. So we'll maybe I'll ask again. I'll ask again then. All right. We had one other fusion rifle question, and I think the answer is you're not making more aggressive frame fusion rifles.
Yeah.
True or false?
So I think we're probably going to kill that subfamily. It was a neat experiment, but just like with Warden's Law, stuff doesn't always work. And there may be something coming in the future which learn from the lessons of the aggressives. We'll see. Okay.
Don't tease me too hard there. Jeez. All right. So there's the answer to that one. Thank you to Insei and Val for that question. Sniper rifles. So we have two questions here that are attacking sniper rifles, not attacking, that are asking about sniper rifles from incredibly opposite directions. So I'm going to ask in order here. So this first one comes from Yvonne. Snipers feel oppressive at a high level in PvP, even after the nerfs, although, mediocre, perhaps at a lower skill level. Any plans to rework them? What is the team's opinion of their body shot damage? And is blinting intended? Or is that something you're looking at?
Kind of a lot of questions. So I'll take this part by part. Mediocre at lower ones. Snipers will always be mediocre at lower skill levels. Like the only way we could make snipers not mediocre at lower skill levels would be horrifying for the rest of the game. So we will not be doing that. We're never going to do descoping. to my knowledge, unless something dramatically changes. Descoping would absolutely destroy snipers in PvE, and we're not going to split the sandbox that hard, where you get descoped in PvP but not in PvE. So descoping is not going to happen. The opinion on body shot damage and blinting, I mean, I don't think, I know that this isn't the answer they want to hear. I don't really think that the body shot damage is too high as it stands, and we as a team don't really feel that blinting is as much of a problem as it is on something like a bow, because a bow is a primary ammo weapon that blinting immensely accelerates the time to kill, right? And the effectiveness of the weapon. Blinting with a sniper is actually less effective than what the sniper could have done, which is just headshotting you, right?
Right.
So blinting is pretty low down the priority list, honestly, for things that we're going to look at. What we are going to look at is changing the way flinch works first, and then we will revisit snipers after the flinch changes have come in. Yeah, and I mean, that's probably not the answer that they really want to hear, but that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, fair enough. I had a feeling since we had kind of talked about flinch before that was going to be the answer to this one, but seemed important to ask. And so in contrast, Insay and Val, I wanted to make sure we got a real question and answer here for you. Snipers in PvE feel mediocre currently and are outclassed at large by other choices in overall damage as well as general utility. Are snipers performing to an acceptable degree in the team's opinion, or is there room to give them a small boost like shotguns and machine guns received in Season of the Haunted?
They're pretty close. I mean, there are some snipers like Izanagi's and stuff, which is a special case, yes, that are up there for DPS. And there are some, additional changes to individual snipers coming down the pipeline that may make snipers, better options. The main thing is that the team tries to shy away from high damage, infinite range weapons in PvE because it puts like an additional weight on the encounter designers to basically make it so that the solution to every problem isn't sit really far away out of damage with sniper rifles and destroy everything, right? And that's just not a problem that they necessarily need to have. And we don't want the solution to everything to just be stay away from damage and snipe, because we all remember Icebreaker from D1. Icebreaker also obviously regenerated ammo, which made it even more broken than that. But like the solution to a lot of problems was sit very far away and just plink headshots. And so they tend to try to prioritize weapons that are more close range or more high risk options. And so it's okay if snipers aren't the best DPS option. But if
they are very safe.
Yeah, if they need something, they can probably come up a small bit.
All right. Well, speaking of answers that are universal, Arbalest question coming from Super Say on Linear Fusions. Arbalest, and I'm going to read it word for word here, has completely and utterly warped high-end content around itself. Are there any plans to deal with it?
I could hear Super Say saying that in his voice. I mean, it's probably too easy a choice to deal with anti-barriers, but hey, we just gave you Wish Ender, which is a primary weapon with infinite ammo. So probably the first thing we're going to look at is like, we give more options. And so you don't necessarily only have Arbalest.
Right.
Because really that's kind of its main use case. And like, there's some other stuff that it does pretty well, but really for the most part, that's it. So I think we would probably want to say, hey, here's some other options. Do you guys like these as well? Before we would just like dismantle Arbalest.
Right. Well, it's often useful for shield breaking as well. But yeah, having some more choices does feel like a more positive direction to go in. So I guess we'll see how that plays out here. I will say that often when I'm running Arbalest, I wish that I could be running a primary instead. So perhaps that will shift the playing field. Also had a question here from Court. Queensbreaker remains a bottom tier exotic due to a combination of factors, which he details there. I believe this question has been asked many seasons ago. And just make it special isn't as easy as it sounds, but has there been any movement to buff or overhaul Queensbreaker in any regard?
Do we really want another special linear fusion? Didn't we just get done talking about Arbalist and Lorentz Driver and how those go? So no, not going to make Queensbreaker a special anytime soon. It's on our list. Like we always, I mentioned this earlier when we were talking about Legend of Acreus, like we have a list of underperforming exotic weapons that we want to revisit. But we don't have any specific plans for Queensbreaker at the moment, unfortunately.
All right. So speaking of other exotics, Yellowhorn has had some changes recently, primarily focused on PvP and Gambit. But the question here also from Court, any plans to tweak it in PvE? Due to its myriad of bonuses, it feels a bit too oppressive in comparison to other exotic and legendary exotics. It providing Wolfpack rounds to non-exotic rocket launchers is a great addition to it for D2. But it essentially is a weapon that is all strength, no weakness, to paraphrase a bit there.
Yeah, I mean, it probably is a little bit too strong, but it's also Gjallarhorn, so at the moment we don't have any plans to nerf it. But you know, we always keep an eye on whatever the DPS meta is and stuff like that. But yeah, at the moment, enjoy its strength.
Can do. All right, so moving on, some questions about perks synergizing with subclasses, which so we're going to kind of stray into an area that's a little bit more on the edge of things you can speak to. Will we continue to see more exotic weapons brought into the 3.0 subclass sandbox with interactions, verbs, and so forth? And what weapons or mechanics do you see as ripe for these improvements? Tons of people asked about this. I'm gonna give a shout out to Soul Reaper and Moonlight for asking some questions.
Yeah, we definitely plan to continue to add additional verb interactions to weapons in the future. Things like Scorch, Suppress, Overshield, Redacted. All that stuff can be used. It just has to be balanced based on the strength of the verb itself and how easy the activator is. Right. We try to preference those really heavily around exotics that feel like the element they are. So Lord of Wolves is a good example. Like Lord of Wolves doesn't really feel like solar. But there are some other exotics out there that really feel like solar. Right. And so we would prioritize the exotics that feel like their element first for those interactions.
So, yeah, I think the question that was missed here was Arc 3.0 is coming out. What about Risk Runner? And I don't know if you can tell us anything or if we just have to wait. I'm prepared to wait.
Risk Runner is going to be enough of a problem child on its own because of how it functions when you get touched by Arc.
Yes.
So let's hold off on buffing Risk Runner.
Oh, not buffing it. I think it probably needs to be nerfed. But
yeah, we'll see. We have an eye on Risk Runner and an itchy trigger finger. So we'll see.
Okay. So question here from Martian Bar. With the airborne effectiveness system now in place, are there any plans to update aspects of certain perks to accommodate the advent of this new weapon stat? For example, elemental capacitors reload bonus on solar. I think inarguably the least popular bonus on that perk being moved to airborne effectiveness, or encore giving some kind of stacking bonus. I think some of this you've already talked about. We're going to see more of this in season 19. Can you speak to this question though?
Yeah, I mean, we could do that, right? Like we've always got an eye towards old stuff that maybe isn't up to snuff. But I think we'd probably much rather make entirely new perks as opposed to shoehorning it into old ones, air assault excluded, obviously. Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's out of the question, but in general, we're going to err on the side of could this be a new perk and then do that instead.
Okay. All right. And so Geolocating Shark coming in here with a question about moving target, just wanting to validate. Does moving target affect aim assist when you're not aiming down sights?
No.
All right. Good to know. +10 only ADS. Do not run it on the hipfire guns. All right, cool. Some general balance questions here in terms of how different things work and how the team makes decisions. So I had a couple of questions come in about kinetic weapons. They're now sharing a slot with stasis, which I think sort of prompted this question. Compared to literally every other weapon type, kinetics are just a gun that shoots bullets. They don't break shields. They don't do anything special. And it does sort of by default make them feel a bit less powerful. So the question essentially is, what flavor are they intended to carry? Will they ever do anything that gives them a parity with an energy weapon, especially since they're now sharing the same slot?
Well, I mean, I believe currently they already deal higher damage to unshielded enemies, right? It's not much. I think it's like 5% or something like that. But I mean, the long and short of it is we're not really stoked about kinetics. They definitely do feel like they're falling behind, especially with verb interactions. So we are looking at other ways to separate them from the energy weapons, but can't share any of that.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Props to 2D for being one of the folks who asked about that. And so we kind of had a related question here, similar vein. What are the team's considerations when deciding the energy type of a weapon? There are a number of archetypes where trying to line things up for match game or champion mods can make it really difficult to build a loadout that you're happy with. So I guess the question is, wait, do you consider balancing the number of weapons of a given damage type when you're building a new weapon or choosing the energy type? How do you think about that?
Yeah, we look at what weapon type and damage type combos are inaccessible right now in the current set of weapons, which ones haven't been released recently, and we basically just try to fill holes. So if we haven't seen something in a while, we'll try to put one of those into the game. Or if one of those doesn't exist, then obviously it gets higher priority over it. So,
okay. I was happy to see this question because I've always felt like there's a bit of a preponderance of void weapons that happen to just be really good. And I don't know if that's down to personal bias or if it's factual, but
it might just be personal bias. I mean, we do a pretty good job between all of the designers on the team of splitting up the weapons each season and letting a number of people design different weapons. And it kind of just is luck of the draw. So it'd be pretty hard for one person to have gone through and secretly made every void legendary weapon just slightly overpowered over the last year.
I mean, I'm talking over the last 6 years, but it's a long con. It's a long con. All right. So what are the sandbox teams' balancing goals when reissuing weapons? For example, the opulent weapons that were reissued.
I mentioned this earlier, but we generally try to keep the best 3 perks in each column, like the most popular ones or the most liked ones. And then we try to add 3 to 4 new ones that either weren't around at the last time the gun was out or that we think would be really strong in combination on the weapon. So, and we try to keep the stats pretty much exactly the same if we can. Yep.
All right. And so this is a question that I think is going to be really difficult for you to answer, given your short history with Bungie to date. But I don't know if you've been able to get any feedback from other folks. How has Bungie's balancing philosophy changed over the years with regards to nerfs?
Yeah, I actually did ask some of the old timers for their perspective on this, because this isn't really a question that I can answer as a developer. I can answer it as a community member.
Right.
But the general consensus is that previously the sandbox team kind of made things more cyclical, where things would rise up to very high overall strength and then be nerfed down to very low overall weakness. And it kept the sandbox changing, but it could be a very frustrating process to deal with from a player's perspective, where stuff would be super, super, super strong, and then it would just be nerfed into oblivion. And then the next thing would be really, really, really OP, and then it would be nerfed into oblivion, right? And it was kind of like this cycle where that happened over and over again.
Yeah.
So the current philosophy that we hold now is a little bit more nuanced. It's smaller changes here and there, and make them more numerous. which makes the sandbox probably a little bit more static. But I feel like we as a team think that that's probably the more enjoyable way to do things. You don't have to worry about your gun being just absolutely obliterated in the next balance patch. Like if it does get a nerf, it should hopefully be a small, reasonable nerf. Or if it does get a buff, even the scout rifle buff, which made them really strong, wasn't like a massive, ridiculous buff. So that's kind of the way we look at it right now.
Yeah, I mean that certainly has been my impression as a player in terms of the journey. So, and this is a question from Deacon, kind of along the same lines here. Can you walk us through Bungie's approach to balancing a specific weapon or archetype? What does the process entail? Does it change if the weapon is exotic?
So yeah, it definitely changes. All exotics are balanced by hand. So the only time an exotic is blanket changed is if we are making a change to the subfamily of the archetype that it's a part of, and we want to include it in that. But most exotic tuning that we do is done by hand, right? So like stat changes and perk changes and stuff like that. The first thing that you want to do is you want to determine the niche for the weapon in PvP or PvE. So there are a couple examples, right? Like easy to use, but not particularly strong. Strong, but requires heavy investment. Straight up meta. Like there's a number of different niches that you can have, right? Great weapon for beginners, great weapon for highly skilled players, stuff like that. Then you basically look at the pain points for that weapon and you see which of those can be changed to bring it in line with the niche. So for example, if one single weapon is too strong, like just the one weapon, you look at what is out of band about that weapon, and it's usually to do with stats or perk combinations. So an example, a gun having 17 zoom when every other gun in its subfamily usually has 14 or something like that, right? Or a gun having 90 recoil direction when every other gun has like 70 recoil direction. Or in main ingredients case, the ability to roll double stability perks, which other fusion rifles aren't able to do. So you look at that in the case of one single weapon. If it's a subfamily that's too strong, you look at what is making them too strong. For example, high impact scout rifles right now, it would be the ease of use of the optimal time to kill, we believe what's making them too strong. And then you would adjust like just that, right, for the subfamily. If something is too weak, you would pretty much do the opposite of any one of these things.
Right.
If it's an entire archetype that's too strong, like it's all pulse rifles are too strong, then you're like, okay, well, what is it that's too strong about pulse rifles? Like maybe it's range. So you just like move the range of the pulse rifle archetype in the direction that you want to go, right? And you bring the whole archetype with it. And, again, just if something's bad, you just do the exact opposite. Like 180 hand cannons, we wanted them to be a good starter hand cannon, but also situationally strong. Problem was the damage level they were at, it required 75% crits to get a kill, which meant they weren't really a great starter weapon. But the time to kill was also 1 second, so they weren't really a great, weapon at the other end. So what we did was we moved the damage buff up to where they could be a 2 crit 2 body, which made them easier to use for a starter weapon. And it also allowed them to 3-tap with a single tier damage buff, like Radiance or Rampage ×1, which made them a better high-end weapon too, right? So that's kind of how we look at that. But the way it always goes is weapons that are overpowered are always a higher priority than weapons that are underpowered. Because if you have 100 weapons in the game and one of them is overpowered, it's the only weapon that gets used. If you have 100 weapons in the game and one of them is underpowered, people just use the other 99, right? That's how it was explained to me. So overpowered stuff will always get the priority. But there's a lot of stuff that we take into account before making balance changes, right? Like usage is one thing. We also look at effectiveness. We look at player feedback, play test feedback, player sentiment, our own experience in the game. And then there's also something that I really love. I think we've talked about before, but it's called net fun, right? And it's how much it's the net total of fun that something brings to the game, right? And that's a combination of a whole bunch of different things. But the example that I like to use is armor lock from Halo Reach, where the person using it had a little bit of fun using armor lock, but the person who had armor lock used against them was furious, right? And so the net fun of armor lock was negative. And so it was taking fun away from the game by continuing to exist in the state that it existed. And when we look at stuff like Le Monarch or weapons that have, a very strong player identity associated with them, a lot of times those are controversial weapons because someone might really, 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 really love using Le Monarch, right? And someone might really, 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 really hate getting killed by Le Monarch. So that's like a net zero. If Le Monarch were to surge in usage, then that might shift in a negative direction and require us to do something to Le Monarch, right? Because like getting killed once by Le Monarch is pretty annoying. Getting killed 20 times in a game by Le Monarch is like wildly infuriating. So net fun is something that we use a whole ton. Lord of Wolves is a funny example because it was like people hate being killed by Lord of Wolves and they don't even really seem to enjoy using it. So it's just like a fully net negative experience. So there's a bunch of stuff like that, and it all ties in together. It's all used as parts of a whole in terms of how we choose to balance stuff.
Yeah.
But like people always meme on us like, oh, the only thing we care about is usage. And like, that's not the case. Usage is an indicator of something, right? But we also care about effectiveness. And a lot of times what happens is like the more something increases in usage, if 1 out of 100 people are using something, and it's pretty annoying to get killed by that thing, but the person who's using it really, really enjoys using it. Like, it may be really strong. It may be a little bit out of band, but it's kind of hard to justify removing what is right now currently positive net fun from the game. But if 100 out of 100 people start using it, then it becomes, that equation changes and it becomes much more easy to justify it. So people like to meme on the usage thing a lot because of the way we phrase some TWABs in the past and stuff. But usage is just one of like a whole number of things that we use to balance. And yeah, if some usage spikes, we're definitely going to take a look at something. But just because something has low usage doesn't mean we aren't aware that it exists and like we don't know what's happening, right?
Yeah. Well, that is fascinating. And it's nice to kind of get some insights into the thinking that goes on. And so we kind of have a question here, kind of a specific question in that vein coming from Flashbolt. And it's a long question. I know I think you've got it in front of you. So I'm just going to give you the short version here. Can you comment on how range as a stat is balanced against time to kill for weapons in Destiny 2?
Yeah. I mean, his example that he uses is, No Time to Explain and Messenger, which are both very strong primary weapons right now. He kind of makes the insinuation that like range and zoom by association don't really have any downside because they provide a lot of secondary bonuses. He says like more aim assist and visual recoil reduction. And also No Time to Explain and Messenger have some of the best times to kill out there for primaries. Short range weapons like sidearms and SMGs have low times to kill, but are balanced by requiring positioning and movement to get to their effective ranges. But this is not the case for those long range weapons. So I'm curious how to understand the context of their best in class DTK. Well, first off, range does not provide more aim assist. This is a constant common misconception. And I'm willing to bet that you just, phrase this weirdly because I'm pretty sure that you know this, but range does not provide more aim assist. You do not get more aim assist for more range. It doesn't work that way. The same aim assist you normally have just remains active at a longer distance. That's what range does, right? So that's the first thing. Zoom, in addition, provides recoil reduction because otherwise high zoom weapons would be so unwieldy as to you would not be able to use them.
Yep.
And we would have to constrain all of our zoom into a little tiny band, right? Now, that being said, the amount that it reduces recoil arguably may be too high. It is something that we're taking a look at because in some cases, like the solution is just put high range or high zoom on this gun and it makes it instantly better. And that's not really a place where we want things to be. But that being said, high zoom can also make guns feel unwieldy up close. That's part of the reason why we didn't see Jade Rabbit dominating Endless Veil. When guns get up into that 1.8, 1.9, 2.0 zoom level, they can feel unwieldy up close. And that is the negative that zoom is supposed to provide as part of its trade-off for giving you more range and a little bit of recoil reduction. The second, or I guess the third thing here is that it's not entirely true to say that something like an SMG requires movement and positioning, and a pulse rifle does not. A pulse rifle does require positioning. As much as people don't like laning is a form of map control, and it is a form of positioning. you can argue that in certain game modes in Destiny, movement is not motivated strongly enough. So once you post up in a position, you can pretty much just stand there, and that contributes to the strength of these weapons. But laning is still a form of positioning and is still a form of map control. It's just different than the positioning that is required for an SMG or a sidearm, right? The third thing, or I guess the fourth thing now, is the times to kill. So high impact pulses are actually like a one-off case. They have fast times to kill because those times to kill are supposed to be harder to hit. There was a point in time where they required 6 crits and they were basically unusable. But 4 crits, 2 bodies is like definitely too easy for that faster time to kill. So we kind of settled on the 5 crit, 1 body for 0.67 TTK. Because the alternative is that they don't kill in 2 bursts, and it absolutely dumpsters their time to kill, right? And that's okay in some cases. Look at aggressive hand cannons that have a 1 second time to kill, right? But the time to kill is easier to hit. Look at 180 hand cannons that have a 1 second neutral time to kill, but the time to kill is easier to hit. So with guns like that, where one side of their potential TTK is really fast and the other side is really slow, you just kind of have to make a choice as to which one of those two directions you want to go in. You can make the time to kill slow and make them super easy to use, or you can make the time to kill fast and make them harder to use. So with high impact pulses, we push them in the fast TTK, but harder to use direction. And that's okay because burst weapons are inherently harder to use than single fire weapons. Hitting 3 crits in a single burst is harder than hitting a single shot if all other things are equal, because you have recoil within the burst. You have to be on target longer in terms of actual time, and it also makes peak shooting slightly harder, right? So all other things being equal, like range, stability, aim assist, all being equal, hitting 3 shots from a burst is more difficult, which is, again, another reason why we leaned in that direction with high impact pulses. This is also part of the reason why Warden's Law didn't work, right? Because Warden's Law required you to hit 2 shots when a normal hand cannon only required 1. And there was absolutely no reason to ever use Warden's Law because of that. It just made things harder with no additional upside, right?
Yeah.
So that's an example of all things being equal and a gun being much worse because it was burst fire instead of something else. So all that being said, we are looking at high impact pulses and we are looking at no time to explain because we do feel like they're performing out of band. We feel like their ease of use is a little bit too high. Yeah.
Just gotta crank up that burst delay. Yeah.
Yeah, but the problem is like changing rate of fire on a weapon is a much more, so there are like levels of changes that we can make to guns.
Yeah.
In terms of how easy they are.
I'm being facetious here.
Everyone always says that though. Everyone's always like, well, just change the rate of fire. It's like, well, we could do that, but we probably want to exhaust like almost all other changes first before we change the rate of fire. Because changing the rate of fire, so like if I want to change the damage of a gun, I can just go into the what's called the weapon BS and like change the damage of the weapon and then like load it up and play test it and stuff like that. If I want to change the rate of fire of the weapon in any like true meaningful way, that's not like a perk changing the rate of fire, but like I want to change the base rate of fire of the weapon, there's like a whole host of other things that go along with it. So that is a change that is not like our first priority of like, oh, well, 180s aren't good enough. Like just make them 200. It's like, we could do that, but we're going to exhaust a bunch of other options first before we do that.
Yeah, fair. All right. So that was kind of a long one here. I think we've got a few quick hits to round out the episode. I want to kind of save the ones that are just for you personally until the end here, if that's all right. And kind of skip to some of the miscellaneous questions. So first up, kind of another potentially an answer that's kind of, I think we would need a whole panel to fully respond to, but it's coming from Martian Bar here. Is there an internal design philosophy between the weapons and art teams that prevents models on no longer obtainable weapon suites from being reused on new guns? You try to keep unique models associated with the original weapons they shipped on and just reissue them? Or is there some kind of, you've got it in front of you, but it's kind of a long question here about, how you decide whether or not a weapon model gets reused.
If it's something that has a specific theme to it, we will generally reserve that in case narrative decides that they want to revisit a story beat. So we generally won't re-release themed weapons without narrative approval. For generic weapons, anything that is older than Shadowkeep is just much more difficult to work with right now than like new models. So generally, like the more recent models are just way easier to modify, and it's almost easier to just rebuild the model from scratch than it is to use a model from before Shadowkeep. So that's the biggest restrictive process of us not using some of the older stuff.
All right, fair enough. Okay. Next up, when will Monte Carlo get a buff so that its bayonet can be used as a glaive?
No comment, and you can't see, but I'm winking as well.
All right, so serious question here. This one from Mossy. Why are most crit multipliers not round numbers? For example, 1.5 is really 1.5, but other multipliers are like 1.402 or 1.598 or 1.697.
So they're actually not. They actually are, for the most part, round numbers. There's only like one example I can think of, or maybe two examples I can think of, where the crit multiplier isn't a round number. The problem is that 40.000 displays as 41 in game. And I do not know why it does that. It drives me absolutely insane. But we use ceiling rounding to display, and anything that is 40 flat does not require an additional decimal. 40 flat will display as 41.
Huh. Well, that's just weird.
Very frustrating, I know. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I think the ultimate thrust of the question is there some intention here to avoid landing exactly on a Guardian health value? But no, it's just a display error.
Yep.
Okay, well, that makes testing damage in game just that much more extra. All right, good to know. So we had a Guardian named Frost submit a whole bunch of questions for us here, and I don't know if we can get through all of them, but we can get through some of them. Pipeline for seasonal design. Can you share, kind of what that looks like, how far ahead seasons are usually planned, how long one might take to develop?
Well, I mean, I can obviously only speak from a weapons perspective. We have a lot more teams that are out there working on stuff. But from a weapons perspective, we usually work 2 seasons in advance. So, for example, season 19 is nearly done right now, and work has been underway on season 20 for some time. Balance changes are, of course, made later. Even, season 18 could be completely done, and we can still make balance changes that will release with season 18. But the later we wait to make those changes, the smaller the changes have to be because of the associated test wake. I mean, we're actually like the most delayed of the teams at Bungie, I think. Most other teams like Narrative and Vanguard and stuff like that are way, way, way ahead of us. Like they're working on, season 19 stuff months before we are. But yeah, we save it to the last minute. We're only 2 seasons ahead.
All right. Okay. So another question here. While the newly rotating raid and dungeon pinnacle system is fantastic and gives incentive to do those activities, players are unfortunately still getting weapons relegated to the old weapon system, lacking origin trait, being stuck in Forsaken era perk pools. Are there plans to refresh these perk pools and add more origin traits in the near future?
Yes.
All right. I'm assuming you can say nothing else on that front by the look on your face.
I can say that you saw Dares get that.
It's true. That's true. We did see Dares get that. And honest to goodness, I've seen more hype for Dares in the last 24 hours, or I guess the last 12 hours at this point, than I have in months. So yeah, that is exciting to look forward to. Additional question here in a similar vein. Are there any plans for crafted weapons to allow us to have selectable perks in the columns instead of just one perk per column?
It is something we are investigating, but it's pretty difficult, actually. I know that I don't care about the realities of development, but it's actually, unfortunately, turning out to be much more difficult to do than we would like. So it's something we're investigating, but we do not have a plan for that right now.
Okay. All right. And so the last one from Frost here is a question that I shortened a bit because it was a bit lengthy and we're running long on questions, but essentially the thrust is that we've seen Warmind cells get nerfed pretty heavily. We've seen Charged with Light get some effective nerfs with the changes to orb generation. Wells are now kind of the new old hotness. I don't know, Wells have been around for a while, but now they're in the spotlight following these changes. Are Warmind cells effectively sunset? Is Charged with Light going that direction as well? What's the feeling on those mechanics?
This isn't really, although it may seem like it is, this isn't really weapons like area. So it's not really for me to speak to that. Warmind cells have like had their time in the meta. And we have changes coming to these systems in Lightfall. So that's pretty much all I can say. Okay.
Hey, there we go. Lightfall. Speaking of Lightfall, you can tell me everything about Lightfall, right? Oh,
if I knew anything about it.
All right. So that's kind of all the general questions that we had here. Just a couple final questions for you to round out 3 hours of Destiny Massive Breakdowns this week. First up, do you have a favorite weapon that you have worked on directly for Season 18?
Yeah.
And you can't tell us what it is.
I cannot.
Do you have a favorite weapon that you've worked on directly that you can tell us about?
No.
All right.
I have a favorite weapon, but I can't tell you about any of them yet.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll have to try and get you back to answer that question.
All I'm saying is you should be able to very easily, when the guns release, you should be able to very easily tell what I've worked on.
All right.
Perks and guns and stuff like that. So,
well, I look forward to DMing you my guesses. All right. What changes from the TWAB were you most excited to see the community react to? And this question coming from Massive Breakdowns Discord memester, whose name I've never been 100% sure how to pronounce, but I'm going to go with Deck.
Obviously, like the Lord of Wolves and Omni changes, like I was happy to get out there, but I was honestly most excited to see people's reaction to like the future stuff that we say that we're looking at, because that's not really something that we've done before, where we told people what it was that we were potentially looking at least not to this level of detail. So I was actually really excited to see what people would take away from that stuff. And like, I like being able to tell people like, hey, we acknowledge these problems and we are working on them. Like, you don't have to sit and wait for several months before you mention anything about it. Yeah.
Well, I personally like that too. And I hope I've seen a lot of good positive responses, but admittedly, my Twitter feed is pretty heavily cold of the people who are likely to give negative responses. So I hope the broader feedback reflects my very sheltered experience. Last one for you here. Did you have any burning questions you looked into once joining the weapons team? And if you're able to, can you share the answers to any of those burning questions? Kind of a follow-up. Have any of your previous opinions on the game in any facet changed drastically since moving to the other side of things? This question from T-Dot.
I looked up the exact damage numbers of every weapon archetype and subfamily within, like, as soon as I figured out how to do it, I looked all of those up, and I have a copy of my weapon stat spreadsheet that I modified with all those exact damage numbers. So my weapon stat spreadsheet is highly accurate, and I really, really enjoy it. The other stuff I looked up how aim assist worked, because I was really, really curious about that. So I did like a super, super deep dive into aim assist and into how our networking works and hit registration and hit detection and stuff like that. Obviously there's a ton of stuff going on behind the scenes that like I would really have to be an engineer to fully understand.
Yeah.
But like I got what I felt like was a good surface level understanding of all that stuff. As far as things that have changed, like, man, development is hard, like super, super difficult. And I know that as players, like, you don't have to care about how development is. And I always felt like I had like a healthy respect, because I did work in technology, and I always felt like I had a healthy respect. But when you actually see the tools for yourself and you actually start trying to do things, it really makes the like, why don't they just do this comments? Like, it really puts those in perspective, because the truth is, like, the thing that you're saying, why don't they just do, has almost certainly been thought of. And the reason they're not just doing it is because something is making it very complicated to do, or they already tried it and they tested it and it didn't work super well. Right. So I definitely have a newfound respect for stuff like that. Because like I had a bunch of why don't I just do this when I first got here? And then I tried to do it and I was like, holy shit, this is really hard. And,
Yeah.
you know, as soon as you actually have to put a couple of your own suggestions that, you know, I was mouthing off a bunch before I worked here about, oh, well, you know, if I had control over it, I would just change this. And then I actually do have control over it and I actually do change it. And I'm like, oh man, this kind of plays like shit. It's like, oh, well. So I would say that a lot of the stuff that like, I thought like, oh, this is easy. This should just be this. And it turns out that nothing in development is really easy. And it is a pretty intricate process.
All right. Well, I think that is a phenomenal note to bring this episode to a close on. It has been really, really enjoyable having you back on the show. I feel like it's old times again. So thank you for taking the time. This has been a super late night for both of us.
I feel like I'm like losing my voice here.
Well, I deeply appreciate it. I think when people see how much time we've put into this episode, the hype is going to be through the roof. And we've covered some serious ground tonight. This has been a really good one.
Yeah, I hope everyone learned something from it. I hope everyone is able to take something away from it and hopefully enjoy the 3 hours of discussion that we had.
Yeah, well, I have learned a ton from this episode. So thank you again, sir, for coming back. Thank you to everyone at Bungie who had a hand in making this happen, because this is not something you can choose to do for yourself anymore. So please pass my heartfelt thanks and my continued promises to play nice. I like having Bungie devs on because this show is about answering questions, and like, honest to goodness, no one else can answer them the way somebody who actually knows the answer can. Yeah, so please do pass on my thanks, and the thanks of everyone in the Massive Breakdowns community. I think we've got a pretty phenomenal group of Guardians who just love understanding how the game works. Yeah,
I mean, it's a great community, and I was thrilled to have been a part of it for as long as I was, and I'm thrilled to be able to give back now that I'm on the other side. And I know that this community appreciates it, and this community has always been respectful, and that's why we're happy to engage in this particular way here. So I'm glad that I can share some stuff, and you never know, maybe someone else from this community will be the next person who ends up getting hired at Bungie.
You never know. We do seem to be starting our own little feeder, little pipeline going on here with St. Kabir picking up a gameplay specialist position. So yeah, who knows? There are a lot of great minds in the Massive Breakdowns community who think really hard about Destiny. So all right, well that is all I've got. I think that's probably all you've got for me, unless you've saved any surprise gems for the end here.
Nope, laid it all out on the table.
What's that? Hand cannons are being removed from the game?
I do sometimes question. I'm like, I wonder if this TWAB is the TWAB that people expected me to write when I got here. I did think about that a good bit today when the TWAB finally went through localization and lock and everything like that and was going to get released. I was like, I wonder if this is what they thought, or they thought it was going to be like, hand cannons are getting nerfed to the ground, Le Monarch will one shot all the time, fusion rifles will reign supreme forever and all eternity. I think there probably are some people out there who believe that, but yeah, no, this is good TWAB. This honestly, this is more or less what I expected. Like,
But that's just comes from knowing a person and spending 600 hours talking about Destiny with them.
There's a difference between the podcast takes and the Twitter takes.
Yeah. Yes.
I feel like if you only knew me through my Twitter takes, then you probably have a very different opinion of me than people who listen to the show. So
yeah, the Twitter takes are missed. Although
they were fun though.
For obvious reasons. I can understand why you can't do that now.
No more Elmo memes for me.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Well, I'm going to have to make a few new ones here. We've got Arc 3.0. I think we need an Arc Elmo. So, all right. Well, that's it. We're rambling now. We're just trying to bide our time to get to the 3-hour exactly mark, and it's not going to happen. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you to all of the patrons for your incredible generosity. Thank you, especially just to fulfill my contractual obligations, to our sponsor guardians, Impetus, Starscream, ZenSoCal, ASCII Monk, Deacon, This Moment, Blackhammer Tech, Binary Wolf, The Shazzle, and Sylve, our newest sponsor. Thank you so much for your generosity. Thank you for all of our patrons, our reviewers, etc., and so forth. Whew, I am tired. Let's call it a night.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah.
And hopefully I'll be back someday.
I look forward to next time. Peace.